Well, good day, everyone. I want to welcome you to African Leadership Magazine's U.S. African Business and Policy Forum. I'm Nwandi Lawson, the Chief Cultivation Officer for the Virtues Collective in Atlanta, Georgia. And today we're going to have the opportunity to explore the current and future landscape of U.S.-Africa relations, partnerships, recovery, and sustainability with those who are really at the helm of making this change. We're talking about the political, civic, and business leaders from all across the continent of Africa and their counterparts in the US. So while there are certainly many events and summits that seek to contribute to this dialogue about these longstanding relationships, both their triumphs as well as their trials, we can truly say that African Leadership Magazine stands out as a voice that contributes consistently to this discourse rather than stepping in and out. So we know that those of you who are joining from all over the world, whether here on the webinar and also on Facebook Live, we see that Kenya and looks like Liberia and Sierra Leone have checked in with us. We know that many of you are joining from here in the United States as well as throughout Europe and other countries. We want to welcome you to take part, to remember that there is the opportunity to ask questions and contribute to the discourse using the Q&A function on your Zoom screen if you're joining us by Zoom. And certainly your questions also at Facebook Live are welcome as well. So we want to, of course, remember that African Leadership Magazine, as I mentioned, has been at the head of helping to establish this ongoing dialogue about the U.S.-African business relationships, those that, of course, shape policy, and those that, particularly during this time of a global pandemic, have meant so much as to the future of healthcare, the future of business, and so forth. And so before we jump into our keynote speakers and our conversation today, we wanted to take a little prospectus through video about African Leadership Magazine. Take a look.
For far too long, Africa has suffered from negative stereotypes and media bias at the hands of the major Western media organizations. The continent has been described and called by every single challenge faced by the people, including poverty, disease, hunger, and youth unemployment, breeding despair and hopelessness in Africa's young people in our globalized world. As a result, these challenges and illegal migration occasioned by this and other issues continue to be major concerns. But that is not all the story. Africa is home to 6 out of the world's top 10 fastest growing economies. Africa is a tourist haven and an ultimate investment destination with abundant human and mineral resources. So many more positives and progress stories that the Western media selectively ignore, and other times actively suppress.
On our own, we're invisible. But together, if we choose, we could be invincible. And that's the thing for Africa. We don't have to any longer take the nonsense about how other people define us. Let us define ourselves. And we have the genius, we have the knowledge, we have the ability, but also look at our countries. We have the minerals, we have the land, and we have all that which could make Africa the first continent in the world.
Over the last 13 years, African Leadership Magazine has committed itself to tirelessly showcasing the best of Africa to a global audience, telling the African story from an African perspective, highlighting unique African solutions to peculiar challenges being faced by the continent today, while standing in defense of African and minority leaders globally that are known for their legacy-based approach to leadership, but unduly attacked by foreign mercenary interest.
I accept to go above and beyond and help Africa make even greater strides. I accept to deliver selflessly. I accept to serve Africa and Africa's interest until the day that I die.
African Leadership magazine and its events and conferences have become the continent's foremost indigenous African-led business platform, helping business leaders, entrepreneurs, and executives develop and deepen their African influence and networks to fast-track their growth story and business interests on the continent. In Africa, where many of the countries are known for weak institutions, poor infrastructure, and some of the world's horrific conflicts, the inspiring example and impact that one truly effective leader exemplifies and transmits is truly powerful and game-changing, not just for the immediate beneficiaries, but for the world. That is why African Leadership magazine have made it our mission to not only discover and celebrate these outstanding African leaders and institutions and position them as agents of change that they truly are, but enable them to continue to inspire and lead effectively so our world becomes a better place for all.
We aim for the same economic and social progress. Shoulder to shoulder, we will stand together and continue to build an Africa that is free and independent. The struggles of our people and their development aspiration remain fundamentally intertwined with those of fellow Africans elsewhere in our continent.
With the inadequate healthcare system across the continent, we're struggling to deal with COVID-19. The economies across our continent have greatly reduced, and many of our economies are in stages of economic collapse, and they are steadily declining.
We live in unusual, unpredictable, and challenging times. Projections indicate decreased flows of foreign direct investment globally, with the first recession in 25 years anticipated in sub-Saharan Africa, according to the 2020 UNCTAD's World Investment Report and World Bank estimates. FDI is projected to decrease by up to 40% globally and between 25 to 40% in Africa.
It is needless to say that though female politicians in Africa overcome many barriers and constraints to access political positions, many of them have little decision-making power. While some are excluded from important government decisions on legislation, policies, and budget allocation. Approximately 50% of women in cabinet handle mostly social welfare portfolios, while only 30% lead the ministries for treasury, infrastructure, defense, and foreign affairs, which are considered to have more political influence.
We are refocusing our development aspirations to ensure that our double-digit growth during the past decade is bolstered with the quality and sustainability to improve the lives of all Ethiopians. The focus on the reform agenda is to complement our infrastructure and human capital investment with an appropriate macroeconomic, regulatory, and bureaucratic environment reform to crowd in the private sector so that private sector become an engine of growth that will sustain and create millions of jobs.
But I can assure you that the NNPC is the largest corporation in Africa. In the last 5 years, our country, Nigeria, has progressed from being the number 3 economy to the number 1 economy in Africa, undergoing massive reforms, which has seen it impact particularly in the oil and gas sector, leading for the corporation to move from a deficit position to a position of profitability. What we did is to focus on the people, our partnerships, and also to ultimately make this company profitable for all its shareholders.
We continue to publish the bi-monthly and highly rated African Leadership magazine, as well as the gender-focused quarterly Amazon's Watch magazine, and have spotlighted, celebrated, and worked with over 20 African heads of state, over 250 senior African corporate leaders, public servants, and community champions, enabling these leaders to go on to make their communities to become healthier, safer, and more prosperous.
The one who buys what you produce supports your prosperity. Therefore, there must be no sectarianism in Uganda because it fragments our market. Moreover, even the Ugandan market is not enough. We need the African market. Hence, Pan-Africanism is core to our program. With the united African market, we can negotiate for access to other markets of the USA, China, India, Russia, Japan.
Ladies and gentlemen, the challenges we face in our current state of relations are by no means impossible to overcome, nor are solutions scarce. Many models of progress have already been proposed and hold great promise for the future of Africa. These include approaches that further strengthen the African peace and security architecture, such as the creation of the African Peace and Engineering Corps, which I am pioneering.
Two of the heads of states we worked with went on to win the Nobel Prize, while our high-level events and work with business leaders have resulted in over $5 billion in deals and more than 500 strategic partnership deals in the last 13 years, creating jobs and opportunities for all. And from a percentage of our corporate profits, we have so far catered and sponsored over 86 indigent African children through their secondary and tertiary education through our Send a Child to School program, our proudest achievement. This is a resurgent Africa, and all of us have a role to play in it. And together, we will bring back the sunshine and sustain the progress that the continent truly deserves. Visit our website and join hands with us as we work towards the eradication of extreme poverty using education as a tool, and the overall attainment of the Global Sustainable Development Goals, both for our benefits and for future generations to come.
And so hopefully that gave us a little bit of perspective on the work of African Leadership Magazine. And certainly that perspective is what brings us together this morning. But beyond the overarching intent of the U.S. Africa Business and Policy Forum today, we maybe can turn our attention for a few moments to one voice that's actually been at the helm of leading this particular charge. As I mentioned, not one that kind of dips in and out of a discussion about U.S.-Africa relations, but one that actually maintains an ongoing discourse. So I want to turn the forum over this morning to the leader of African Leadership Magazine. Dr. Ken Gyame is going to provide us with some welcome remarks. Welcome to you, Dr. Gyame.
Thank you, Wendy. And thank you. It's always a beautiful time to speak to Africa and speak to great people like we have here today. I'm very pleased to welcome all of you to the 6th U.S. Africa Policy and Business Forum, organized by the African Leadership Magazine. And let me especially recognize His Excellency, the Vice President of the Republic of Namibia, who is expected to join us shortly. And then let me also recognize ministers. I can see the Minister of State from Ethiopia, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Sierra Leone, that we are expecting here today. It's always an exciting time to discuss African matters and issues that affect Africa. So permit me to share my thoughts very quickly with you with few words. And for all of our participants joining us, I was checking various countries, already over 36 countries represented, and we're expecting more to join us as we proceed. Thank you for coming here today, and thank you for your love for Africa, which is proven by your being in attendance at this forum. The U.S. Africa Forum seeks to continuously, give me a second, please. The U.S. Africa Forum seeks to continuously provide insight and chart the course forward on improving the frequency and quality of investment, trade, and policy relations between the US and Africa. This year's edition, it's no doubt very timely and equally important. The reasons are simple. Experts have underscored the need for the Biden presidency to reset its engagement with Africa in terms of trade policy, in terms of quality of engagement, in terms of defense cooperation, climate action, among others. America's relationships and engagement with Africa are thus expected to necessarily advance across multiple fronts than what it used to be. Let me quickly say that Africa has a rapidly growing and increasingly urbanized population with associated needs for products, goods, and services, opportunities, energy infrastructure requirements, and even more. And the continent's total population is expected to reach nearly 2.5 billion people by the year 2050. This is our continent's unique strength that should put the continent at the forefront of a US investment agenda, an agenda that should seek to develop a mutually beneficial and long-term relationship characterized by equal partnership, sustainable development, and trade rather than aid. However, you would agree with me, and I do agree with pundits, that the United States may not have engaged adequately and correctly with Africa as it should. The current bilateral trade between US and Africa is decreasing from $31 billion as it were as of 2019 to a paltry $12.7 billion over the same period by 2020. This has created room for other players and interests to gain a stronger foothold, despite the US being a long-time traditional partner for the continent. It's, however, pertinent to mention that there have been steps recently aimed at growing US private sector involvement in Africa in recent times. Under the previous administration of Donald Trump, we saw the landmark Prosper Africa, which was launched in 2019, and it's helped to strengthen bilateral trade and investment with the continent, supported by the BUILD Act, that's the better utilization of investments leading to development. Signed in 2018, the BUILD Act consolidated the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, and USAID Development Credit Authority into the US International Development Finance Corporation to mobilize private investment in emerging markets. And out of the over 29 billion in active commitments globally, we saw the DFC put forward about 8 billion specifically to Africa, making it the second largest recipient of investment from the DFC, following Latin America. And I'm also excited to know that William Fanjoy, the managing director of domestic commercial engagement at Prosper Africa, will be joining us today during the panel sessions to tell us more about what the US is doing. Relatedly, while our leaders in Africa look to finding strategies to confront the twin health and economic crisis created by the COVID-19 pandemic, we should not lose sight of the immense vaccine deficit in Africa. Available data shows that less than 2% of the nearly 700 million COVID-19 vaccine doses being administered globally are being in Africa, where most countries have been receiving vaccine in very small quantities compared to demand that's available. This limited stock and supply bottlenecks have put COVID-19 vaccines out of reach of many people, especially the poor and most vulnerable in our region. And this can significantly be addressed by enabling and facilitating investment in our manufacturing capacities. Just this morning, the African Development Bank would say that Africa has no business begging for vaccines. Africa should produce its vaccines. And we will be able to do this with relevant support from partners and friends. Need I say that such investment will not only greatly strengthen our weak pharmaceutical and health systems, but also our manufacturing capabilities. It will also help in the development of our human resources in the areas of skills shortages and education, increased research, as the US have demonstrated strong leadership in vaccine manufacturing over a very short period of time. We are hoping to see a plethora of such US cooperation across the continent, not just to strengthen manufacturing capabilities in the continent, but help in creating the much required job employment for our young people. Therefore, Africa will require the partnership of the Biden era to acknowledge the continent as a place of many opportunities. And we expect this current administration to lay the groundwork for a renewed US policy agenda to promote resilience and prosperity in Africa, given President Biden's proclivity for multilateralism and his anticipated prioritization of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and also with the AGOA Act up for renewal in 2025, we believe that now is a great time to reassess its impact and scale up its operations. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, our 2021 US-Africa Business and Policy Forum this year therefore has as theme US-Africa relations, partnerships, recovery, and sustainability. And we look forward to engaging discussions and conversations as our very experienced speakers and panelists provide insights on what the Biden's Africa policy would be in the coming months and coming years. Over the years, African Leadership Magazine has invested in the conviction that with the support of friends and partners, Africans can lead themselves into peace and prosperity. It is why we have made it our mission to not only discover and celebrate outstanding African leaders and institutions who we count on to lead the change we seek, but we also actively enable them to continue to inspire and lead effectively so our world becomes a better place for all. We do this through our publications, events such as this, and also through special recognitions to deserving African leaders and champions who continue to inspire and who continue to lead in the face of great odds in their various fields and communities. Today, we are celebrating a select few, by no means an exhaustive list, but we've picked on this few to say thank you for the great work you're doing. We're recognizing President Geingob of Namibia with the Inspirational Leadership Award, Dr. Adedutan, the CEO of First Bank, Professor Kennedy, Chairman CSS Group of Companies, Mrs. Nana Ama, Deputy CEO, Ghana Export-Import Bank, Mr. Chiori, the CEO of Ocean Glory Commodities, and Professor Bello Abubakar, the CEO of Galaxy Backbone Telecoms. We're also very proud of two of you out of this list. We've just been informed. Our partners and friends at the Georgia legislature have selected Mrs. Nana Amapoku and Mr. Peter Ko-Chiori for a special legislative commendation. And just this morning I've been informed that a delegation is visiting Africa next month, and they will be happy to pay visits on some of the leaders we've mentioned here today in your various countries. Congratulations once more from all of us at African Leadership Magazine. You truly make us proud, and we want to say thank you. And like we tell all our honorees, these recognitions are not an end in itself, but a call to do more, a call to more service to the fatherland. I therefore wish to again offer my hearty congratulations to all honorees today, and we count on you to keep up the good work. In closing my remarks, may I urge all attendees at this forum to take advantage of this gathering and participate actively in the conversations using the Zoom chat box, like we've been told, or for those of you watching live on our social media platforms, use various engagement tools, share your thoughts, ask questions, agree where you think you should, disagree where you deem so, And we assure you that these presentations, these contributions, questions that you ask will form part of our reports and post-event submissions to relevant stakeholders in the US-Africa project. And to keep you updated on our various publications, events, and other African leadership resources, we invite you to follow us on your preferred social media platforms. Just search the word, the phrase African Leadership Magazine on Facebook, follow us on LinkedIn, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on YouTube to keep the conversation going. On that note, I want to thank you again for being part of this session, and we look forward to a wonderful deliberations with our very, very wonderful speakers lined up for this afternoon. Thank you again, and do have a blessed meeting.
And thank you, Dr. Gyami. Of course, he is the chairman of African Leadership Magazine, and we really appreciate those very encouraging remarks, but also remarks that help to frame the conversation that's going to take place today. And we know that this is a conversation that won't begin and end with words. In other words, this is a time for us to come back in and to reflect on what the current state of affairs is, and then use that as a tool for figuring out where to go next. So in beginning our actual forum today, we want to welcome the remarks of the Minister of Trade and Industry from Ethiopia, His Excellency Teka Gebreyesu, who's going to provide us with a little bit of insight into the current state of affairs there in this East African nation, and perhaps some of what the current landscape looks like in terms of US-Africa relationships, the partnerships, recovery, and the sustainability of these. So I would love to welcome to the African Leadership Magazine stage or forum this morning, His Excellency, Mr. Teka Gebreyesu, who, as I mentioned, is the State Minister of Trade and Industry for Ethiopia. Are you there, sir? I can see his box there, but I'm not sure if he is prepared to deliver his remarks yet. I'm sure he'll join us in just a moment. Of course, as Dr. Gyami was reminding us, this isn't just a presentation, though. It is, of course, a conversation. And so we look forward to welcoming your comments, remarks, your questions, and as was even noted, your suggestions about what changes need to be made. I know already one of our panelists has offered to us that we really need to nurture leadership skills in the youth by incorporating entrepreneurial and leadership skills into basic education. So I'm sure that from among many of those of you who are joining us, as well as the stakeholders who make up the panel, the notion that Africa, of course, has one of the greatest resources in the fact that it has a very youthful population that hasn't gone unnoticed by the business community around the world, but also that we're able to nurture an education system that enables us to welcome growing numbers of African youth entrepreneurs into this particular circle. We're going to actually move to another part of our program at the moment, while I'm going to, of course, look forward to hearing the remarks from the State Minister of Trade and Industry in Ethiopia. And we'll turn our attention for the moment to a special presentation from Dr. Jackie Cilliers, who's the chair of the Institute for Security Studies in South Africa. Dr. Cilliers was the head of the Department of Peace Studies and the director of the John and Elnora Ferguson Center for African Studies at the University of Bradford in the United Kingdom. He served as the commissioner for the UK Commonwealth Scholarship Commission and held the UNESCO Chair for African Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Bradford. Some of you may have come to know him because he does contribute regularly to a number of international conferences, as well as the opportunity to contribute to radio and television broadcasts as well. So we're really honored this morning to begin our discussion with Dr. Cilliers, who's going to help us to begin framing the platform for US-Africa relationships. What do these partnerships look like in terms of recovery and sustainability? Welcome to you.
Ms. Lawson, I'm not sure if you were referring to me. You read somebody else's CV out. Do you want me to continue?
I would love for you to continue. I do apologize if I've given you the wrong introduction, but
no,
please,
it doesn't matter. I'll
please
introduce myself.
Help us to continue with the program. I appreciate
it. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Yaki Silia. I'm the head of the African Futures and Innovation Program at the Pretoria office of the Institute for Security Studies. So I thought I do long-term forecasting. So I thought I'll reflect a little bit on some of the structural trends that maybe inform our debate. I think the departure point is that generally things are improving in Africa, but more slowly than we would perhaps like. There is what we would refer to as limited catch-up. Let me illustrate this remark by making the point that if we use GDP per capita as a measure, then in the 1970s and 80s, GDP per capita in Africa was about half that of the rest of the world. By about 2010, it was about 30%. And today it's about a quarter. So over time, the gap between average GDP per capita in the rest of the world and in Africa has been increasing. So things are improving in Africa, but more slowly than in the rest of the world. If we take another measure, which would be levels or rates of extreme poverty, now we expect in our forecasting that rates of extreme poverty in Africa will probably peak at about 524 million people by 2028. It's still increasing, and then it will slowly start to decline. At that point in 2028, extreme poverty in Africa alone will be about double that of the rest of the world. At the same time, Nwandi, as you mentioned, there's very rapid population growth in Africa, particularly young people. But our challenge is simply that although there are countries like Ethiopia, Rwanda, and many others, Senegal, that are growing very rapidly, economic growth in Africa is not sufficiently rapid enough to really rapidly improve incomes and reduce poverty. Now, if we look at the trends between the United States and Africa, it's a bit of a depressing picture, I must admit. US investment in Africa has been in a structural decline since 2010. Africa gets less foreign direct investment from the United States than any other region globally. US trade with Africa is also on a structural decline. I think US trade with Africa is less than 1% of total US trade. Third, the US is still the largest provider of aid to Africa, particularly humanitarian assistance. But on a aid per capita basis, the US is something like the 29th or the 30th largest, or smallest, should I say, in this instance, aid provider to Africa. And then we also see a decline in the number of Africans that study in the United States. These trends that I'm mentioning are in stark contrast with the trends, for example, from China. So in recent years, US engagement has primarily focused on political and humanitarian concerns, provision of humanitarian assistance, election monitoring, the containment of infectious diseases, and terrorism. Now, in contrast to the relative indifference of the United States to Africa, rising powers like China and India have become Africa's largest trading partners. Turkey's embassies, schools, and hospitals across the continent signal its growing trade. So I make all of these statistics just to underline the importance that the Biden administration really needs to show African countries that the continent is a priority and not just a piece on a chessboard in their fight in the great global game between the US and China that is unfolding. And in actual fact, if you listen quite carefully to the statistics that I mentioned in the beginning of this widening gap, things are improving in Africa, but slowly than elsewhere. The United States really must find a way of collaborating with China in Africa. We are not your chessboard, and Africa will not prosper if the two largest economies globally cannot find a way of working together. Now, there has been progress, particularly under the Biden administration. There's higher level, but much more needs to be done. We need high level US government visits by top leadership, by President Biden, by Vice President Harris, and by Secretary of State Blinken and others. There needs to be a demonstrated commitment to Africa's regional priorities, such as the African Continental Free Trade Area, long road that we have to travel, and to Africa's post-pandemic recovery. We need to support the establishment of local vaccine production in the time of COVID-19 in countries like Senegal, Morocco, Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya. And the United States really need, and Africa and the United States really need to lever the world-class educational institutions and expand the exchange of the flow of people. But most important of everything is that the US-Africa relations must focus on initiatives that generate jobs and gather economic opportunities. Now, we've done a significant amount of work on the long-term future of Africa, and I will, in the chat function, post a link to an open access book that many of you may find interesting on the long-term future of Africa. But our work indicates that modern technology, and the US is the leader, opens up large opportunities. Probably the number one opportunity to grow Africa is simply the provision of household electricity access across Africa. You can't participate in the modern world without electricity, and renewables and decentralized off-grid and other systems provides massive opportunities. And once that is done, we need access to internet, not in towns and cities, but across the continent. Needs to be cheap. It's the one way in which we can leapfrog and become part of the 21st century. And the US may even, as it rebuilds its own infrastructure, rediscover ways in which it can help with infrastructure build in Africa, like China has done, with amazing potential, amazing positive results. Stepping back from some of those high-level practicalities, it is in the interests of Africa and of the US to partner to rebuild a liberal international system that is designed to ensure the security of all nations and promote cooperation and shared prosperity, that is built and that depends on the dense lattice of institutions that was developed after the Second World War. The world, the international community, the West in particular, is stepping back from this. And Africa, with 55 very small countries, is of tremendous risk in this growing competition that we see today. A distributed global industrial and a liberal order will be a global good. And that the practical implementations of that are a different approach to the patent rights of dominant corporations. The Biden administration has shown remarkable progress in its thinking with regard to the waiving of patent rights on the COVID-19 vaccines, which is a good start. But it needs to do much more. We need to fix the WTO dispute resolution system. The decisions on special drawing rights, another step in the right direction. Much more is required. Most important for the US, which is the biggest investor, is to find ways beyond build and so on, to encourage private and de-risk private investment in Africa. China is investing in Africa. Turkey is investing in Africa, but the US is not. What we find with the US is a decline annually, structurally, year on year of its investment. The private sector is the growth of the future, and we must find a way of turning that around. And there are many things that the United States can do, such as supporting what we refer to as radical transparency in all the dealings that it has. For too long, many African governments hide behind secrecy and abuse their own people. And that gives rise to terrorism, as it is giving rise in Mozambique and in the Sahel and elsewhere. And other initiatives that the Biden administration has already embarked upon, like the reduction of the space for tax avoidance. So, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, dear friends, thanks very much for inviting me to make a few remarks. Good luck with the rest of the conference today. And thank you for the opportunity to have been able to add a bit. I will add a link to an open access book in the chat function that some of you may find interesting. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. I find that, and I'm sure others as are remarking in the chat now, are finding your remarks extraordinarily enlightening and perhaps providing some vision that is not necessarily always provided in terms of US-Africa relations. Wondering if I could just ask a few follow-up questions to what you've shared. In particular, since you've noted that the larger trading partners and so forth, that in terms of per capita wealth increase and so forth are actually not the US. What are the benefits to the nations of Africa even attempting to strengthen US and African relations when in fact China, Turkey, and India, as you note, are already making large investments and have very wonderful collaboration deals?
You know, I started my remarks by making the point that things are improving in Africa, and they really are, but they're not improving rapidly enough. And the private sector, as you go up the development ladder, is eventually the source of growth. Increasingly, investment from others, from China and elsewhere, is originally it was very much state-led. Is increasingly is also private sector-led. But there is the West is where the money is. It's rich. If Africa cannot unlock the investment from this wall of money, it will not grow. We have huge challenges in terms of infrastructure. We have huge opportunities in terms of our young market that you and others refer to. And we need to find ways of de-risking that investment. And what is interesting is the extent to which modern technology is lowering the risk, but is also increasing the potential of entering markets at a much lower rate of GDP per capita than was the case previously. You can now enter markets and you can make a business from provision of renewables in the rural areas or the provision of water in a slum area that previously you couldn't do. Modern technology, and the US is the leader. And Africans, when they look at social media and they look at, they really look towards the West. And they look at the individual freedoms and the democracy of the West. But the West needs to, in a sense, it needs to demonstrate the advantages that democracy, protection of human rights, transparency have for ordinary Africans. And that is not the case. The impression one gets in the last few years, particularly under the Trump administration, is that the US has stepped away from Africa and that its interests are limited to maybe the odd terrorist. It's no longer oil, but that they do not realize the importance of the extent to which Africa looking forward is going to be a swing region in the determinant of what is going to happen with the global rules-based system. If the US continues on its current pathway of benign neglect, then Africa will turn, as it is doing at the moment, and turn and look eastward. And I'm not making a point for competition. Because China is hugely important for Africa. I'm making the point of finding ways of collaboration, not only with the US, but with China, but also with Europe, because of the requirements that I set out in the beginning with regard to slow growth and poverty on the continent.
So very helpful. I wanted to, before I let you go, I wanted to forward to you one of the questions from one of the attendees who just asked very basically, what happens if Africa doesn't develop? So what are the repercussions? You mentioned some of the, what we might be looking toward by 2028 and beyond. What are some of the larger repercussions if we can't correct some of the areas where development is not being addressed?
So we've done quite a bit of looking at long-term futures. I'll make the point that Africa will grow because we have such a growing population. People will find a way to develop. So I have no doubt. It's just a question of, at what rate will we grow and how rapid, and will that growth be inclusive? But I think if you speak to our friends in Europe, their biggest concern, of course, is that Africa's bulging, we have a 1.3 billion population at the moment. By 2030, that's 1.7 billion. That this bulge of Africa will in actual fact end up on their doorstep as migrants, something that, of course, the US lately is also very concerned of. Personally, that's unlikely because in actual fact, migration is a function of more rapid economic development, but that's just a different issue. I don't think in today's globalized, interconnected world, you can find that the United States, Europe, and even China and India build a wall around Africa and say that Africa must look after itself, and that somehow we're going to isolate poverty and suffering and sit and watch this happen. That's not going to happen, but that is just not either humane or a realistic proposition looking towards the long term. Africa will develop because Africans have the same developmental potential as any other region in the world. There's historical reasons why we are where we are, but I think the prognosis, particularly with the Continental Free Trade Area, is really quite a positive prognosis.
Well, your remarks have been very helpful in a wonderful way for us to get started. My apologies for giving your bio incorrectly at the outset, but I do want to just remind everyone that we were hearing from Dr. Yaki Cilliers. He's the chairman of the board and the head of African Futures Innovation Institute for Security Studies in South Africa. Thank you so much for helping us to get started.
Thank you very much.
So we're going to continue this discussion. We've got a lot here on the table to think about, and I know that you all are beginning to weigh in with more of your comments and remarks. We want to continue to encourage you to do that. As was mentioned, we're at well over 35 nations joining us from around the world, from Africa as well as Europe and North America. And we want to continue to have this be a very rich discussion, not one that's very, very flat with some of the platitudes that are often offered, but without much depth. So we really are appreciative of where we're going in this discussion. We want to turn our attention now back to the Minister for Trade and Industry in Ethiopia. And we want to welcome His Excellency, Mr. Teka Gebreyesus, who is going to help us develop a little bit of concept or context from within the African continent itself as to how these US-Africa relations, how are they contributing to more partnerships, the ability to have recovery and sustainability. And so I'd like to welcome to our forum this morning, Mr. Teka Gebreyesus. If you can turn on your camera and we'd love to hear your remarks at this time. I can see you there, but I cannot hear you yet. Welcome. I want to see if our technical staff might be able to help with the audio. So one suggestion that I might make, I'm so sorry, I know technical difficulties can be very difficult. I do notice that on screen you have two devices. Could we possibly unmute the second device and see if we can hear you in that case?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Perfect, thank you so much.
Sorry for the inconvenience. This is Taka from Ethiopian Industry, my state minister. Sorry, our minister cannot be present today because of some urgent meetings. He said sorry, so I will be the one to present the presentation on behalf of him. Excellencies, representative from US government, invited guests, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Addis Ababa. I'm truly delighted and honored to attend this U.S. African Business and Policy Forum, which focuses on partnership of U.S. and Africa. I would also like to thank the African Leadership Magazine for the excellent and rich agenda of the forum. Can you allow me to share, the presentation? It needs some permission from your side, I think. Can't go in. Yeah. I think you can see the presentation now, the PowerPoint. Okay, thank you so much. Sorry for that. So allow me first to say a few words about our continent. Africa consists of 55 countries, 33 are less developing countries and 22 are developing countries, and 46 member states are the beneficiaries of Africa, the Growth Opportunity Act scheme. It covers around 1.3 billion population, 43.4% is in urban and 56.6% is in rural. The working age is 55% and the population, the number increases to 70% in 2035. The combined GDP is more than 3.4 trillion and the world's second fastest growing region, experiencing average annual GDP growth of 4.6, but only 6% of global GDP. And the total land area is approximately 30.3 million kilometers square. We have a big area and a big population, but still 36% of our population are still living in extreme poverty. The relationship between Africa and the US dates back to 1819 with Liberia, followed by Ethiopia in 1903 and Egypt 1922. FDI Africa from the United was 43.9 billion US dollar in 2019. Africa receives lower FDI flow than any other regions. For example, Europe 30.57 trillion US dollars, Asia Pacific 955.36 billion, Australia 162 billion. Most of the FDI comes from China, 60% of the FDI. That means 86.38 billion USD of FDI into Africa originates from China. Whereas the United States and France consist 8% of the FDI flow to Africa. US and Africa annual trade value in 2020 was about 45.67 billion USD, in which Africa exports and import trade consists about 23.73 billion USD and 21.94 billion USD respectively. Overall, the trade balance is positive, but this is not the case for Ethiopia. I will show you the figure later about Ethiopia. This is the table that shows, the trade balance of Africa with US trade exchange from 2016 up to 2020. With regard to Ethiopia and the United States of America, the diplomatic relationship starts in 1903, where a treaty of commerce was signed between the Emperor Menelik II of Ethiopia and US Representative Robert P. Skinner during a meeting they held the first official diplomatic encounters in Ethiopia. The two countries' governments have steadily augmented their relationship by signing different treaties and working jointly in different areas of cooperation, particularly in trade and the peace and security sectors. Moreover, America's long-standing commitment to investing in Africa was highlighted by President Obama when he was visited Ethiopia and the African Union headquarters in 2015. Ethiopia has been an important partner to the United States in regional security and counter-terrorism effort. The two governments had fight designated terrorist groups like Al-Shabaab. The United States has also been providing development aid to promote sustainable development, economic liberalization in Ethiopia. Ethiopia's recent political and economic reform have further broadened the opportunities for mutually beneficial collaborations between these two countries. I would like to inform the forum on the key policy changes. The government was very keen to reform, the economic and the political situation in Ethiopia. And for the last 1 year, the government was aggressively working on the election process to make it more transparent and fair. Ethiopia government is strong belief elections should cause democratic government to translate citizen preference into policy. The purpose of the election made this month are protecting the interests of citizens, promoting equality, and preventing abuse of power and creating stability. More than 37 million people actively participate, and from the statement by the various observers, the pre-election and election day process was conducted in orderly, peacefully, and credible manner, which was happening this week. The second, focus for the government was just providing electricity access to Ethiopia. Electric access in Ethiopia is also one of the lowest in Africa. Only 25% of the population is having access to electricity. The per capita consumption of electricity in Ethiopia is also very low, which stands at about 100 kilowatt per year. Ethiopian government has faith in economic development, including industrialization, and improve the living standard of people. Will not achieve without proper infrastructure in place. Based on this, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is a 6,450 megawatt hydropower project. Will help our citizens out of poverty and enhancing industrialization in different sectors without the expense of brother who shares the water with us. The other reform, which was the policy issue which was made by the government, was the homegrown economic reform plan, currently being implemented in Ethiopia, aims to redirect the Ethiopian economy away from the state dominance by opening up the space for the private sector, play the lead role as the engine of economic growth and transformation towards realization of the vision to make Ethiopia the icon of African prosperity. In this reform, we give more focus to the private sector. That's the big pillar of this homegrown economic reform. The reform includes macroeconomic policies, structural and sectoral reform issues, namely correcting foreign exchange imbalance, controlling inflation, improving access to finance, ensure sustainability, easing business trends, as well as addressing sector-specific institutional and market failures. The WTO accession and the African Free Trade Agreement implementation are anchor for the homegrown economic reform. Let me say a few words about opportunity on AGOA, what opportunities AGOA brought to Ethiopia. Ethiopia has been an AGOA beneficiary country since 2000 when the AGOA Act was enacted. A review of Ethiopian performance under the AGOA over the last 13 years shows a mixed result. On the one hand, AGOA exports have shown a steady growth in volume and product mix. Ethiopia AGOA exports have increased from a very low base of 215,000 USD in 2001 to 15.3 million USD in 2019. On the other hand, AGOA has opened a new export opportunities. Ethiopia has exported non-traditional export items such as textile, apparel, leather products, handmade goods in increasing volume in US market. Trade statistics between Ethiopia and US shows that the average trade exchange, total trade turnover from 2015 to 2019 is about 1.6 billion, out of which 230.8 million USD consists Ethiopian export to US. The remaining 1.4 billion USD of trade is imported from US. The main export item to US in the period of 2015 to 2019 are coffee, not roasted or decaffeinated, other footwear, other oilseeds, men, boys, shirts, cotton, men's or boy trousers of cotton, most of the export products covered in the list AGOA. The major imported item from USA in the year 2015 to 2019 are airplanes and other aircrafts and other machineries. Generally, the US market is indeed a huge market that offers Ethiopian firms great opportunity for business growth. Having a duty-free and quota-free access to this huge market offers Ethiopian firms great opportunities for business growth and expansion. However, Ethiopia does not utilize the AGOA scheme as expected due to the information gap that affects most of the exporters and manufacturers. Poor logistics, less productivity capacity, transportation costs, limited presence of US investment in Ethiopia, this can be mentioned as the challenges for the AGOA scheme. Finally, Ethiopia aims to achieve middle-level income status by building a modern industrial economy by 2025. And AGOA will make its own modest contribution to realization of the vision. When AGOA was enacted in 2000, the champion of the act strongly believed that by opening the US market for access by African producers, AGOA would stimulate the development of light manufacturing industries, example, textile and apparel, leather products and shoes, and encouraging similar economic activities that enable African economies to use them as a potential engine of economic growth. The COVID-19 pandemic is highly affecting the non-traditional export to US for the last 2 years. So ending AGOA preference by 2025 would have a serious consequence on the economic prospects of many African countries, including Ethiopia. Several African countries are keen to see if America can renew the lifetime of AGOA for another 10 years instead of pursuing the US government's state policy preference to replace it with bilateral free trade areas negotiated with the individual African countries. In the event that the US government sticks to its current policy, Ethiopia remains hopeful that as a less developing country, it will continue to have access to the US market on duty-free and quota-free terms after 2025. As way forward, during his campaign for the presidency, Joe Biden noted that the US should not miss the opportunity to engage African youth and that it should prioritize economic growth in Africa by strengthening trading relationships, empowering African women. Since coming to office, the Biden administration has also taken decisive steps to put multilateralism back to the center of US economic policy. However, from all indications since assuming office, the Biden presidency has continued the policy position championed by the previous US administration to end AGOA in 2025. The position vis-a-vis Africa is likely to change. At the same time, Ethiopia hopes and expects to build on its solid and long-standing bilateral relationship with US at different levels, including support to its WTA accession process, implementation of the African Free Trade Agreement, inward US private investment, enhanced cooperation in the fight against climate change and all areas of economic and security relationship. Thank you so much.
And we thank you as well for that very insightful presentation, which took us back to the historical perspective of US-Africa relations, in particular from the Ethiopian perspective, and then brought us into the current day as well. I wondered if I could just ask a few questions before we move on to the next presenter. And one I wanted to ask about was the relationship that we know about economic development and also regional stability, things that can be expressed, of course, in the eastern region of Africa. We know that many factions and conflicts, of course, are present and also in the past. And I just wondered if you could speak a little bit about the impact of stability on the region in terms of its trajectory for economic development.
Yeah, can you hear me now? There is some connection problem. That's why there is no stable internet connection. That's why I sound. Yeah. Sorry for that.
No worries. Could you hear me though?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I just wondered, yeah, if you have noticed in the work that you've been doing in terms of developing the economic trade, what has been the impact of the regional instability, the conflicts that are taking place, the factionalism and so forth? How is that impacting the work that you're trying to do in Ethiopia?
Yeah, exactly. The instability has its own impact on the economic development. We know that, so this instability should be resolved soon. That's what the government decided. And we are keen, to work, how can we, establish stability in the country? So the government is very keen. And we have also trying also to strengthen our relationship with our partners, to just bring back, the relationship, the positive relationship that we had with all our neighbors and also with the US and other countries as well. So the government is working aggressively on this issue. Especially we have already just developed, how can we regain, the stability of the country. Not only the country, the regional stability also is. We have a responsibility also as the country, because the headquarters of the African Union is also in Ethiopia. So it will have an impact also in the African countries, not only in Ethiopia. So as a government of Ethiopia, we are just trying to bring back the stability and to link with the economic development, the political situation in Ethiopia. So the government is working actually on this area. I cannot mention specifically what are the activities which are done by the government. Still, there are some measures taken by the governments to bring back the stability.
Definitely, that's a tough one, because it's a long standing, and since you presented the history and then contemporary, we know that many of these conflicts, of course, have very, very long history. I was thinking as well, you gave some information about the imports and exports, and as you were listing the exports, I know even here in the U.S., where I can enjoy a cup of Ethiopian coffee every morning and generally do. I noticed, though, of course, as I'm sure we all did, and as you were noting, most of those exports, of course, are unrefined. And you spoke about this kind of information gap in manufacturing and so forth. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about any efforts that are being made to be able to up the number of fully refined products that maybe Ethiopia is able to export.
Yeah, actually, because our export depends on the agricultural products, the raw products, So what we are doing now is we are just developing integrated agro parks, This could be a model for other African countries as well. So we have already inaugurated 3 integrated agro parks as a pilot project, for the country. So we have seen, so many positive results from this agro integrated parks. We have companies, FDN and local companies who are just processing coffee, to add value on the raw bean coffee, and exporting, it will bring some values to, because as you see from the table in my presentation, most of the export items from Ethiopia was raw, coffee. So most of the developed countries add value and they create some more monies than the Ethiopians, So that's why we are just working on the integrated agro park. How can we process, the raw agricultural products, and how can we enhance also the productivity of, the agricultural sector? Because the product we have should be as per the international standard to meet the export standards. So we are working on that aggressively, and we are also trying to attract companies, US, Europe companies to come and to invest in Ethiopia, especially on the agro-processing sector. And we are still encouraging also local companies to participate, in the investment area in the agro-processing. Instead of sending, raw beans, it's better to have a processing facility in Ethiopia and exporting, so we can get more values. It will create some positive balances. Our trade balances still, as you see, it's a negative trade balance we have so far.
Well, that's very helpful. Before, I just had one more question, and really thank you so much for helping us with all of this information. I wondered if you could give us a little bit of vision as to what type of U.S. investment would be most helpful in Ethiopia at this particular time. Are there certain sectors that you're really keying in on, or certain types of investment?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we have some priorities, as a government, we have priorities on the manufacturing sector based on the competitive advantage, for the country. So we are just looking, as I mentioned earlier, we have a big potential on the agriculture sector. We have so many, some big companies also, by the way, in our country who are from US, FDI US companies who are investing in the garment sector. But still we need, more investors in the power sector, especially we are just looking some companies in the electricity power sector. We know that US has a good experience in this area. There are so many companies who are working in the power sector. So we are looking for some companies in the agro-processing, in the power sector and service sector as well, we need to have, a technology transfer also. We need from these companies a technology transfer, not only investing in Ethiopia, we need to have also a technology transfer from this company.
Well, I want to thank you so very much. We were really richly blessed by getting some of your perspectives from Ethiopia. So thank you very much for making the time this morning. And of course, this is the State Minister of Trade and Industry, His Excellency Teka Gebreyesus from Ethiopia. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And as we continue along with the U.S. Africa Business Policy Forum, we're going to go, I guess, to another region of Africa for this particular presentation. We want to welcome to the forum Mr. Ini Ebong. He's the Group Executive, Treasury and International Banking at the First Bank of Nigeria Limited. And he has a lot of experience from work with Citigroup, as well as being former head of the African Fixed Income Local Markets and Trading through Renaissance Securities Nigeria Limited. And he's going to bring to us, I believe, a little bit of more perspective as to what these trade balances might look like as we're looking toward a more, an Africa that is growing in its ability to have sustainable partnerships and really recovering through this particular period of the COVID pandemic. So we'd like to welcome you, Mr. Ebong, and look forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are, to everybody, and to all the participants and fellow speakers here. First of all, let me just say a little bit about First Bank. First Bank is one of the leading financial institutions in West Africa. It was founded in 1894, so it's 127 years old. We currently operate out of Nigeria, where our head office is located, and 6 other African countries, predominantly in West and Central Africa. So when you look at them from the perspective of trade relations, especially with US entities, we've been around for a long time, and I've served as a financial intermediary with a whole gamut of such corporate and other institutions in the last over 100 years. I think when one looks at the evolution of the financial space, especially post the COVID pandemic, or when you step back and think about it, financial intermediation between Africa and the US largely revolved around supporting international trade. And historically, that has largely been visible trade. So whether it's been facilitating the flows of commodities, manufactured goods, raw materials, and so on. But increasingly, in the last couple of years, I would say that's moved more towards financial flows, where we've seen with the evolution and growth of African financial markets, we've seen some of the bigger markets across the African space become broader frontier markets where we've been able to attract a lot more capital flows into these markets. And that has had a knock-on effect in allowing much needed hard currency capital come into the countries, which are then used for other developmental needs by government, supporting currencies, supporting economic growth, and other things. Beyond that, we've also seen a lot of investment now moving into the financial space with the rise of development of fintechs. So when we look at what we do in First Bank, one of the big areas of growth for us, we have traditionally been a very large wholesale bank, predominantly with a retail and commercial footprint. But in the last, I would say, decade, we slowly pivoted towards being more of a much bigger digital player. So if I take, for example, our First Money offering, which is the most successful financial institution-led agent banking proposition on the continent, today where we have 100,000 agents that are driving financial inclusion activities, we see in the fintech space a lot more activity where we're seeing a lot of investment flows that are needed to expand that space coming from the more developed markets, particularly the US. So we see a lot of that. And as Africa gets more integrated with the advent of policies like the AfCFTA, which has recently been launched, we see the opportunities for more regional flows, more regional direct trade between countries expanding significantly. Today, when you look at how we're positioned, the flows typically are Africa, developed world back, and very little of Africa to Africa or intra-Africa flows happening directly. And that is true of both financial flows as well as actual services, or when we're dealing with real visible items of trade. So it's our hope that as the policymakers in governments drive through policies such as AfCFTA, then the financial services industry, of which we're a big player, will take that up, and we start to see a lot more regional integration. I'm a firm believer that it's a regional financial flows that need to happen and that will drive the successful integration of the visible trade. And then we start to see more meaningful cross-border trade across our countries. First Bank is positioned to do that. We operate, especially within the West African sub-region, we operate in 6 countries, Senegal, Sierra Leone, Gambia, Guinea, and one of the things we do is using our presence is try to support the emerging regional champions that are active across the sub-region in driving these objectives. So we see a vibrant future. We see progression in policy. We also see incremental development of the financial markets across the countries, which then lend themselves to being the platform that will drive this activity and, by extension, regional growth. So I think I can pause here for a second, given the time I have, and I'm happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you as well. I can appreciate the vision that you've given us for the role of a finance system that has structure and strength. And I just wondered if you had any examples, perhaps, that you could give us as to, particularly with financial technology that you mentioned, the fintech industry. How is that contributing to some of the bottom line? Is it reaching the grassroots, and in what ways is it helping people to be able to elevate wherever they might be engaging in entrepreneurship or small business transactions throughout the region?
Thank you. I think the example I will use is our First Money platform. Now, First Money basically is the agent banking proposition. In Nigeria today, First Bank, we've got 800 plus odd physical branches, brick and mortar. But with our First Money agent banking network, we have over 100,000 agents, all branded, supported by the bank out there. That effectively extends our reach way beyond the 800 physical locations we have. So it gives us a much broader footprint across the country in Nigeria. We also have rolled that out across the sub-region in the DRC, in Senegal, and in Ghana as well. Now, what does that do? Now, First Money basically rides on the back of your average mom and pop shop, corner store in every little hamlet or village, wherever you are, especially in the rural areas of the country. And in those areas, financial inclusion is limited, right? because the major branch of the location is, or maybe as much as an hour away. But beyond being an hour away, the cost of transporting yourself from the rural area to this semi-urban area to transact far outstrips perhaps the underlying transaction you want to do. So by empowering agents, right, and the model that's run in many of our countries relies on the fact that the existing agent has a small little business, right? But empowering that agent, supporting him with technology, we give them devices that link to the bank that they can extend, open accounts, do activities on. They basically earn an additional source of revenue. I'll give you an example. I went up to the northern part of Nigeria in one of the remote areas to visit one of the agents as part of our meet and greet. And we had a location where the agent in this particular community had a little store, and he shared with his wife. So he did a pharmacy, and the wife was a seamstress. Because he was so successful as an agent and was generating so much revenue, he was able to, well, evict his wife from his store, rent a new store to expand her own clothing business, while he expanded his agent business. And we see that all over the country, especially in these rural areas. We give them a little bit of technology, they can connect to the bank, and they effectively become mini financial institutions on their own. They serve the local community, and every time they transact, they earn a fee, right? We also use it for gender inclusion. In Nigeria, of the 100,000 plus agents, about 30,000 of those are women. And you know, it's a very important tool to not only serve the bottom of the pyramid, but also for that bottom of the pyramid to find a different way to earn a living, as well as ultimately providing financial services in that area. And we're able to now overlay additional products on that. So now that they're in the net, we're able to lend them money at the micro level, introduce micro insurance, micro pensions. So it's a practical example of how technology is driving not just, well, I would say economic growth, economic empowerment at that base of the pyramid. And we're at the forefront of this, not only in Nigeria, but across West Africa. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I was delighted to hear that the woman who was evicted from her husband's shop was able to find another place to set up. Before I let you close, and we're going to move you also to the panel so we can have a little bit more rich discussion. But because you've been describing a banking system that uses technology across national borders and all the way from large cities down to very rural areas, I wondered how the system is secured. How are the financial resources? What is actually backing this?
Okay, well, given the evolution of financial services, what we're witnessing today is the fusion between true financial services or traditional banking with technology. So today, whether you're looking at a banking institution in the third world or the first world, the debate is, are we financial services entities or are we technology companies, right? So cybersecurity is the biggest headache, the biggest risk factor that any financial services entity faces today. So the massive investments in resources to harden our infrastructure, to defend ourselves and protect our depositors' funds and financial transactions from cyber attack, and it's a never-ending battle. The more we invest and secure, the more vulnerabilities we find, and we have to continue to do so. So we use cutting-edge technology, and it's a continuous. You're on a conveyor belt. We continue to invest to do the best we can, secure the environment.
Thank you so much, Mr. Avong. We were able to, I'm sure, get a bit of a clearer vision. One of the observers or attendees was noting, of course, that this is perhaps an effort that can unite all of the countries in Africa around some banking solutions, rather than depending on so many local, each individual area trying to develop its own. So we'll see what the future holds. But we're going to move now to our panel discussion, and I'm going to have the opportunity to turn it over to our moderator. He's going to help us to guide the discussion on deepening U.S.-Africa trade relations. And so with that, I'd love to see if the Honorable Aaron T. Manaigo would be willing to take us through this discussion.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Lawson, for the absolute fantastic job you've been doing thus far in guiding this forum. And I'd also be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank Dr. Ken Giammi once again for putting together such a robust panel of discussion and subject matter experts. Once again, Dr. Giammi, outstanding job by you and your team at the African Leadership Magazine. So as we start looking at this portion of our discussion, the title that we have is Deepening U.S.-Africa Trade Relations, Partnerships, Economic Recovery, and Sustainability. What we'll try to do as we engage in this dialogue is start with a big picture question, and then synthesize down to get into a little more specificity. So if I would have the liberty of throwing out our big picture question before I go into our announcing our panelists, the big picture question that we'd like to tackle is this: will the Biden administration embrace and support the new Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which is the largest in the world in terms of number of countries, or will his administration resume competition with China for economic and resource dominance? That's our larger question for the panel, and then we will go into more specific questions. So with us today, we have the Honorable Melaku Alibel, the Minister of Trade and Industry for Ethiopia, Ms. Joan Waddleton, the President of U.S.-Africa Business Bridge, Mr. Gary Whitehall, the Chief Geostrategist for Africans Beyond Aid, and Ms. Nana Poku, the Deputy CEO, Ghana Export-Import Bank. Thank you all for participating in our panel discussion for today. So if we could go back to that larger theme
sorry for barging in.
Yes.
I'm sure there's an updated list which you may have missed. So I thought to just clear it very quickly as you go into the rest of the panel. I know B. Fanjoy is here, the Managing Director, Domestic Commercial Engagement, Prosper Africa. He's on this panel. And then B. Fanjoy, I'm sure you see him, MD from Prosper Africa, is here. And then we have the Honorable Minister of State is represented. Just before he came in, he had given a short speech, but he's represented by the Minister of State, His Excellency, Mr. Teka, who is here. Thank you. Over to you then.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Giammi, for that updated list, and I apologize if I missed anyone on that discussion. It certainly wasn't done intentionally. But just getting back to our big picture question, again, I'll restate: will the Biden administration embrace and support the new Africa Continental Free Trade Area, or will this administration resume competition with China for economic and resource dominance? I will ask Mr. Fanjoy to please give his comments on that.
Surely. Good morning or good afternoon to all. I can't speak to the Continental Free Trade Agreement per se, but I can say this: where we are with trade and investment with this administration is a mutual relationship, okay, between Africa and the United States, not just from the United States to Africa. So Prosper Africa represents trade and investment from the US to Africa, from Africa to the US, in investment in both directions. We're also looking at spanning all vectors, whether we have worked in development, trade, or investment. Mr. Manigo, they're all intertwined. We know that. And so we're making sure that all 17 agencies of the US government are intertwined as well to increase trade and investment. Specifically, though, look at the focus on US minority and diaspora. Diaspora is a key component to our success. In the trade missions that I've brought to Africa from the United States, the dominating is diaspora. They're ready. They understand the culture. They have got unique, extremely unique relationships in the countries, and they're trusted. They're trusted as Africans. They're trusted as Americans. They span between the two just so beautifully. And so about 5% of the US companies that I bring to the continent from the United States are diaspora. And in this administration, we're going to focus on the diaspora, the women-owned, and in the minority-owned to make sure that we have the best, to be honest with you, the best step forward. And building a mutual relationship. And if I could give an example, the mutual relationship is not only caring about the US export, but it is what is the investment needed in Africa? What is the leave behind? We were talking about refining, so that there are exports leaving from Africa, maybe not necessarily all the way to the US, but perhaps regional. We hope back to the US. And so I'm working directly right now with a Nigerian sesame oil processing plant in order to provide the investment from the United States for the manufacturing equipment, but also then working with aid on the ground for training at the plant. And then with supply chain, hopefully back to the United States. So to enable the Nigerian plant to interact in a circle of trade and investment. We're doing the same thing with dried vegetables for export from Nigeria. Once again, we're looking at providing the equipment to Nigeria, to the growers, so that they can actually do the drying there, the finished products, and then complete the supply chain back to the United States. And we're working with an outside of Chicago distributor back here in the United States. So that's what we're all about. It's mutual, it's 360, and it is focused on diaspora. Thank you so much.
Ms. Waddleton, how does the US-Africa Business Bridge see that question that I laid out, that theme rather? I think your mute button is on, Ms. Waddleton.
Thanks. The US-Africa Business Bridge is a startup trade association designed to match African businesswomen, elite African businesswomen, with US companies looking to enter the African market. When I was at the State Department, I created a program called AWEP, the African Women's Entrepreneurship Program, which brings these very dynamic African women to the States for training in business matchmaking. So the bridge is sort of AWEP 2.0. In terms of how the bridge would view it, I would say sort of more generally, I do believe that the Biden administration will be very supportive of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. I think that is something that we will see. And I also think that talk about China, and I think that Africa policy is Africa policy, not China policy. And China's place in Africa, certainly having spent many years in the American government, is something that doesn't make me, I don't find encouraging. And I think the answer to it is not to focus on sort of beating out the Chinese, it's to focus on Africa and having the best possible relationship with a continent that we have deep historical ties to. So I don't view it as an either or. China policies here, we must focus on Africa. We must do whatever we need to do to completely optimize our relationship. I think that the free trade agreement, the Continental Agreement, is a marvelous thing. I'm a huge fan of it. And my hope down the road, and not tomorrow, but in years to come, is that eventually when the internal African trade has been harmonized, the intra-African trade is up and humming. And I think inevitably, the African Union, whoever is in charge of this, will turn outward and look at negotiating free trade agreements with the U.S. I feel sort of the EU is alluding to this. So that's a longer term goal. But once again, China policy is there, Africa policy is
there. Minister, I'd like to turn the question to you, sir. Clearly, the Biden administration is just 6 months into taking the reins of the U.S. government, and by all accounts, they are doing their best to clean up any misperceptions that the United States is not a friend of Africa that may have been left over from the previous administration. But dealing directly with the question, because we have not as yet seen President Biden lay out a full U.S.-Africa policy, nor been able to get his more senior people at the State Department through the U.S. Senate confirmation process. Do you see from whatever signs or signals that you have that this current administration is going to be focused more on the business of doing business with Africa, or is it more so doing business with Africa to cut China off at the knees in its ability to garner resources and et cetera on the continent? How do you see that, sir? Minister?
Thank you. Yeah, just concerning, regarding the African Free Trade Agreement, as you know, 54 countries have already signed and 36 are ratified, and most of the African leaders are committed to reduce tariff. This is a good, start for the free trade agreement in Africa. So what we expect from the Biden administration is, the tariff within Europe was less than African, it was very unfortunate to have such kind of, trade relationship within Africa. The tariff between the African business was very high, just comparing to other countries, other developing countries. So what we are just working on is, as I mentioned earlier, most of the African leaders are willing, to reduce the tariff. So what we need from the Biden administration is, as a support, is to encourage the American companies to come and expand their business, invest in Africa, to utilize, the opportunities in Africa, and to support Africa as well, to have a trade within Africa. That's what we expect. As I present earlier in my presentation, as during, the Biden, he was promised, to support, the Africa, especially just supporting women employment, creating a women employment in Africa. That was the promise from the Biden. That's what we expect also from the administration. Instead of comparing, competing with the Chinese government, they have to focus how can we support, the African government to just smoothing, this free trade agreement. We need such kind of technical support. We have so many problems in the logistic, transport, because many of the problem with the American market was, the logistic, the transport, the distance itself. Africa from to America was very far, so it has, a logistic burden for Africa. But instead of focusing on American market, it's better to focus within Africa market. As we mentioned, we have a big population, we have a big market. So what we need is, to have American companies, FDI from America to come to Africa and invest and work closely with us. That's what we expect.
Thank you so much for those comments, Minister. Ms. Poku, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to see you joining us today, and I hope you are well. I'd like to bring you into the discussion, if I might. Trade policy between nations is generally an extension of their overall foreign policy engagement. How should African nations look to best position themselves to take full advantage of a Biden administration that has honestly sent early signals they are keen to engage? I think we just lost Ms. Poku. Mr. Kingsley, I'll toss that question to you, as it seems we might be having some technical difficulty with Ms. Poku. I'll turn that question to you, and I'll repeat it. Trade policy between nations is generally an extension of their overall foreign policy engagement. How should African nations look to best position themselves to take full advantage of a Biden administration that has indeed sent early signals that they are keen to engage?
Thank you very much, Honorable Manaigo. That's a very important question. And like you just said, earlier on in his administration, the Biden administration has set it out straight that he would like to engage the continent. And of course, not just engaging the continent, but I see or I perceive that it's going to be an engagement of equals. And so it means that the days of having to, come to a table of, discussion table, believing that there is so much to offer the continent and that the continent is only going to benefit from the relationship is over. So it has set a template for how the engagement should actually happen. And what I would like to see, of course, is a situation where African governments begin to have their own unique discussions and conversation on how to engage the US market. We can say, for instance, because as you are aware, the continent, of course, is we have people, we have institutions, and we have countries with their diverse and unique experiences. It means that investing in Nigeria, for instance, will be entirely different from investing in Ghana. So the one-size-fits-all strategy that they had adopted in the past is no longer tenable. It means that for each of the African countries, we must, every president or every leader, as it were, or trade minister, as it were, must decide what are they putting on the table. And we must have that clear understanding of what we are bringing to the table before we even have those negotiations and discussions, even before the US entities begin to engage, because I perceive that very soon we would begin to have a lot of engagement and a lot of outreaches from the US government, as it were, to some of these African countries. So we do not have to wait until they are here. We have to begin to decide if for instance, there's an outreach for, from Washington, what will be our priority discussion? What would it be? What are some of the things we've seen in the past that did not work? And how are we willing to change same? And that's on the one side. And another thing is, of course, that countries must now begin to understand that the continent has got to put its best foot forward. It means that discussions that must be held must be led by those who truly understand the dynamics or the prevailing realities and what it means, of course, to benefit from this kind of partnerships. We wouldn't want a situation where people who do not understand the global trends and business are leading conversations. That way, we might not benefit from those partnerships. So if you ask me, of course, this presents a unique opportunity for African leaders, especially, of course, and the policymakers, as well as, of course, business leaders, to begin to define how the relationship is going to, the pattern of the relationship, so that at the end of the day, we would have a mutually beneficial partnership and, of course, a partnership of equals that helps to advance our collective good, as it were, as a continent, of course, and the relationship between Africa and the US. That's my submission, if you ask. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you, Ms. Walton. Let's bring you back in on the same question, but let me expand on it a little bit. Should our African nations look to bilateral agreements for trade deals and enhancing trade, or are they regional trade deals better suited for them to maximize potential in dealing with and increasing their trade opportunities with the United States? Ms. Walton, please. I think your mute is still on.
I'm sorry. You have the Continental Free Trade.
We want to hear everything you have to say.
Well, little it is. You have the Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's a huge accomplishment. Go with it. I don't see really where it gets you to attempt to do bilateral agreements. Having read through the foundational document of the Continental Agreement, it's clear there isn't a lot of interest in that. Once, again, as I said, once the entire continent is harmonized into a customs union, you will move as one, and that will be an extraordinary, huge economic powerhouse. And I really think that you should be driving to that. I don't see, I'm not convinced there will be an interest in the US in bilateral agreements. And I really just don't see the point. When you have this massive, powerful economic engine, just throw everything at it.
So would you recommend then regional trade deals as the best plausible avenue for success to increase and enhance trade with the US?
Well, I think if you look back at how this Continental Agreement has progressed, you've sort of moved into regional agreements, and my understanding is the theory that they will merge at a certain point into one big agreement. So having spent many years negotiating trade agreements, I will tell you, it is long, hard work. Any agreement will take years to do anywhere in the world. Any trade agreement of any kind takes forever and it's painful. And I just wouldn't see the point. I just think there wouldn't be a point to it. Once again, in my mind, the ultimate goal is when Africa completely harmonizes, becomes a customs union like the European Union, it would move as one as the EU does. I don't see the logic in it.
Mr. Fanjoy, what do you see as the most plausible course of action to increase and enhance U.S.-Africa trade relations, particularly in this administration?
Right now, Honorable Manigo, it's very simple. It's what follows a trade agreement or precedes it, and that is action between the African business or the ministries with the U.S. Embassy and our deal teams. So every U.S. embassy across the continent, it now strategically has deal teams that meet every 2 weeks to discuss the top deals that are brought to them by U.S. business, by projects, by investors, and by African governments, their ministries, and the door is open. And I mean that sincerely. We are looking for ministries to knock on our door and say, this is what we want to do. And we have got these businesses ready, poised to work with US, and it aligns with the strategies of the US. Let me give you a very brief example. In Burkina Faso, again, one of our cybersecurity companies here, small, in Washington, D.C., Diaspora worked in Burkina Faso with the government on a cybersecurity data center. It was approximately $80 million. And it took about a year and a half, 2 years to put together. And it was our government backing the U.S. collaborative unit. It was 27 companies. Started with the small diaspora company, but then we brought in Cisco Systems and 25 other companies. And it was a collaboration between the ministries, the private sector, including Cisco Systems, and the U.S. Embassy that finally did it. And to tell you the truth, Honorable Manigo, we love competition. We keep talking about China. China's not our direction, but there are competition. Competition's great because it forces us then to come up with better terms to offer our African partners, other add-ons like training through USTDA training grants, you name it. We want to know about our competition, and we want to know from our ministries, what kind of a deal are you looking for? As long as it's fair, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for a fair deal and leveling the playing field. And we would like to know from you, what does that deal look like? And we will work with our private sector to get the best American and put that deal together. And most often it comes with numbers of companies, not just one. Thank you.
You know, one of the things, Mr. Fanjoy, and I'll just kind of come back to you quickly on this is, you know, throughout his tenure in the United States Senate, now President Biden has always been known as a deal maker in a transactional type of individual. I'm just hoping that that kind of mindset is what will permeate Foggy Bottom and the U.S. Commerce Department and the rest of the U.S. federal agencies is taking from President Biden that kind of, you know, transactional get things done mindset Do you see that because his his Africa policy team, senior Africa policy team, has not been set in place yet? Just from the people that have been nominated thus far, do you see those individuals carrying that same spirit that over 40 years or so President Biden has exhibited in the U.S. Senate while he was in the U.S. Senate and now as president?
100%.
Mr. Fanjoy?
Yes, we see support for Prosper Africa, which is two-way partnership trade. So yes, he's focused on transactions. We're focused on transactions. We have a long way to go. 1.5% of U.S. exports to Africa. That's absurd. Down from 2% from a number of years ago. So we know that we can double that. And it's only, Honorable Manago, it's only through partnerships, two-way trade, and in mutual relationships. And that's what the administration is poised about worldwide, but certainly in Africa. That is our focus. And it's pretty easy to see what that looks like on a pragmatic basis. And that's why I say our embassy is open and waiting for ministries to walk in and say, here's what we want, and to start that dialogue that will result in a real transaction.
Sorry.
Sure. Thank you for that, Mr. Fanjoy.
No,
Mr. King, please go ahead.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And just taking it up from where Bill left off, I think 1.5 or one quarter of the investment from the U.S. to Africa and down from 2 is a real cause for concern. And I think that's why this conversation is actually happening. And looking at, of course, there was a lot of excitement in the continent when the Biden administration, of course, came on board, and we've seen some of the policy direction of the government and the pursuit, and the greater interest, of course, in engaging the continent. The real question will now be, of course, the government will provide the policy framework, of course, for businesses to ride on. But what the business, the likes of Bill and then, of course, Ms. Joanne Waddleton, what we do with, these conversations beyond platforms like this would, of course, help in shaping the outcomes of this engagement at the long run. So I would like us, of course, beyond, those conversations to begin to look at opportunities of the strategy of bringing more businesses. I like what Bill had mentioned earlier with the gentleman you were working with, of course, to see how some of those businesses can grow and leapfrog those businesses. We want to see more of those kind of engagements. I think it's also important at this point to invite Mr. Gary. Mr. Gary, probably he would have 1 or 2 things to also share regarding this discourse, because I think it's a very important discourse.
Well, Mr. Kingley, I'm going to bring Mr. Whitehall in with our next line of questions. So thank you for that transition. As I want to transition over to Mr. Whitehall. Mr. Whitehall, one of the big things pushed by many emerging market countries is from aid to trade. What does this really mean? And are countries espousing this notion actually prepared to absorb the potential outcome? Mr. Whitehall, how do you see that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I'm going to answer it in 5 bullet points with just a little bit higher level, building in on the last question too. In my experience, having spent almost the past 15 years in Africa, to be honest with you, the United States government misprioritizes and misunderstands Africa. Africa is not one mono region, as Kingsley said, it's 5 separate regions. Those are 5 separate regions that socially, politically, economically, militarily function and reinforce in very separate ways. As Joan said, each of those regions in a trade perspective boil up and then it becomes one larger agreement. And so when we look at what China is doing, as Joan also said, in transforming Africa into its kind of hybrid war military proxy, what we really have to understand is the US has to figure out what its larger vision is here for Africa. I respectfully disagree with Bill. I think transactionally, we're not going to get anywhere. It's great that Mr. Biden wants to do transactions here and there, but if we keep piecemealing Africa, in 20 years, China is going to own the whole continent hands down, no matter what. And that's not what we're here to do as America. That's not what we're here to do as policymakers. So here's some quick points for you. Number one, we need to, building on what Kingsley said, we need to leapfrog Africa into a transnational export infrastructure. Transnational export infrastructure, okay? What we should also be doing is reprioritizing Africa and the United States foreign policy agendas, the number 2 hemispheric priority. Our government, our administration, we still have our heads in the sand a lot of ways. And that's not going to get us anywhere. We need to be focused first and foremost before even trade on institutional supremacy. What China is doing with a lot of these smaller countries, indebting them, and then also getting in on the ground economically, is they're flipping a lot of the core institutions around against the Western democracies and against first world countries to be able to weaponize those institutions. That's not something that, you know, trade by itself can defend and secure and protect against. So what we need to be doing is also looking at a soft power agenda, and it starts with infrastructure. We can have all the trade and we can have all the agreements we want. Africa needs 2.5 trillion in infrastructure investment in the next 15 years. If we do that, we can have an economic engagement agenda at the larger scale of what Bill talks about and hyper-targeted around what Mr. Kingsley had also talked about. What the US has been good at to this point, these would be the places I would start in trade, because it's not rocket science. Where has the United States been successful at this point? It's in particular, it's been great on education, it's been great on healthcare. So how can we do digital education, digital healthcare, leapfrog Africa into that transport international network? And last but not least, is an organizing principle of all of this. You know, 90% of all Western democracies, first world countries, are going to be back to their per capita GDP income by 2022, right? 2/3 of African countries will not be there for the next 5 to 7 years, if they even get there. So I would propose as an organizing principle of how we think about upskilling, reskilling, doing deals, a lot of the things Bill talked about, Joan talked about, even Mr. Teka, I would say, how do we get Africa to, in most African countries, at least the first tier countries where business capacity is big, Kenya, Ethiopia, Nigeria, Ghana, 10,000 per year in GDP per capita income. If we did that, we can do amazing things. We can buttress the China threat. We can grow African economies in each of the 5 regions, and America can come out as a winner and doing the right things for the right reasons in a hyper-targeted African way for Africans. Thank you.
Well, picking up on that, Mr. Whitehall, are you suggesting nation building as the carrot for the prospect of relationship building across the continent?
Yeah, I mean, but once again, it starts with a compelling, audacious vision that we don't have. Right now, America's position on Africa is pretty much institutionally blind when it comes to the threats of the 21st century. We're technologically unfit on the continent for sure. And besides the Sahel region in the north, where it's going to be a generational war, we're pretty much militarily unready for what China is doing in 47 different ways simultaneously in most of the countries, particularly the DRC, particularly in East Africa as well. And now they're moving more towards West Africa and a lot of infrastructure investment, particularly in Nigeria. So nation building, sure, but once again, unless you have the 50,000-foot view of organizing principle of what this compelling vision is, where Western democracies can stand up and come together and build a future forward Africa, getting down in the details, in my opinion, is irrelevant. You know, one of the things we have to deal with, for instance, is the economic colonialism of France and what they're doing with the French franc and some of these things. If we don't start dealing with that, and you want to talk about trade policies, you know, ECOWAS, you know, conveniently sidesteps this discussion, but you can't sidestep it forever. And China knows how to exploit and interject in a conversation like that. And these are some of the very high geostrategic and military level things that also tie right into the economic issues we're talking about and the social inequality issues.
Ambassador Lewis, thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us today. You served in the Bill Clinton administration. You obviously served at a high level in President Obama's administration. Part of your focus had been on Africa and building up relations between U.S. and African nations and cities and businesses. Can you touch on what Mr. Whitehall just said, and do you see that as a reasonable way for the U.S. to increase its footprint on the continent from an economic standpoint?
Well, first of all, thank you, Aaron. That's a very interesting question in some of the points that have been raised. But speaking from the vantage point of where I've been and what I have seen, is that the work that we did in State Department was really around state and local leaders, and also working and with those state and local leaders, working very extensively with their economic development and their trade investment teams. We know that working within Africa is complicated. But one of the things that we can see in a new administration with President Biden is that he has spoken very early on, starting in February, putting forth that America, not just America being back, but America wants to partner with the African Union, want to partner with African countries, want to partner with African leaders around the issues that we see progress can be made. We know that trade is the overarching one that we're all here talking about today, but we know that we have other issues that are going to have to move, that will move this conversation, that trade conversation forward. But who will be the ones that will move the conversation
Such
forward?
as?
And we believe it's going to be
such as what, Ambassador Lewis?
It's going to be people-to-people ties.
What are those other topic areas?
Well, Biden basically put forth global health issues, working with climate change, and also working with on the COVID-19 vaccine supply. So you've got to work on those issues. But people really want to talk about increasing that trade. But how do you do that? You're going to have to do it through our Africa diaspora community. And so it was really important to hear the president and the vice president talk early on with the secretary about how we're going to have to engage our small and medium-sized enterprises. Because that's where the promise is, working with African entrepreneurs and leaders around where the growth sectors are going to be. And America is really strong, we know, in digital, in tech. We're strong in the services sector. We're strong in agro-processing. But we're going to have to be able to do that, not just by looking at big companies, but how can we work with our civil society, our women entrepreneurs, our youth entrepreneurs and leaders to really kind of push these efforts forward. It's not going to be just for a government to government conversation anymore. I believe. I think it's going to be one that is going to be engaging the citizens of both of our respective all of our respective countries.
Well, speaking of that, Ambassador Lewis, and Mr. Fanjoy has also alluded to this, but let me take you back just a few short years ago at the onset of the Trump administration. Within the first year of that administration, he had already sent Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, the First Lady, Melania Trump, and I think maybe in the second year, he had sent the Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross. That's quite significant from an administration. What will we really need to see from President Biden beyond these early, very positive signals that Africa is going to be a priority? But lip service is one thing. Sending high-level cabinet officials, your secretaries, is another thing entirely different. I'd like to ask. Can
I respond to that? I hear what you're saying, but I think what we always say is President Biden has been in office less than 5 months, and one of the signals that he has sent has been some of the most positive signals that we have seen in the last 4 years. And with those signals, it is meeting with individuals with the mutual respect that is accorded leaders. And one cannot express how in this community within the African diaspora, of which I'm also participating in some different organizations, to show that level of interest, to show that level of participation, to show that level of outreach by Secretary Blinken, by Jake Sullivan, our national security advisor, by the president and the vice president, is really very, very important. And you can't ask for anything more other than more. And I believe there's going to be more to come from this president.
We certainly hope so. I anticipate that it will, based on President Biden's track record, as I alluded to earlier, particularly when he was in the U.S. Senate. So hopefully that'll be an indication of what he's looking to do, and that permeates his administration. But Minister Teka, I also pose that to you, is that we did see these big early signs by the Trump administration. Are we going to look for similar big signs like that in the Biden administration to give us a clear signal that, you know, trade, policy, those things are going to be important in this administration? Minister, check. Yeah, I think your mute is on. Okay.
Thank you, Honorable. I think as Excellency Ambassador Rita mentioned, it's actually too early to judge, you know. That's what I'm thinking, you know, actually, because Biden administration is in the office for the last 5-6 months, and their main focus was on the COVID. That's what we thinking, you know. We're expecting more to come, you know, after this COVID. We're expecting more supporters, more engagement from Biden administration. That's what we expect, actually. We know that trade policy is not only selling goods and services, but there are some political relationship also matters, you know, on the trade policy. That's what we understand from the last, you know, experience we had. But you know, the political situation, which is, you know, very difficult in many African countries, is because of the economic, you know, impact itself. So unless we work on the economy, on the trade facility, on the economic development part, it is very difficult actually to secure, you know, stability. So there should be some relationship, you know. We should not give only focus on the political issue. There should be more focus on the economic aspect, on the trade aspect. That's what we expect from the Biden administration, you know. As early mentioned, you know, many of the embassies, like for example, we can take the Chinese embassy. The Chinese embassy are very highly engaged, you know, in the economic trade policy, you know, in the African continent, especially when you take in Ethiopia case. The embassy is very close to all the companies, the Chinese companies in Ethiopia. They try to support and to give, you know, the necessary whatever training you can call it. They also invest on the infrastructure. So we need to have more support, more engagement from the Biden administration. As I mentioned earlier, but it's very difficult actually to come to conclusion, you know. We don't know so far what is the, you know, the policy towards the African trade policy about the Biden. As I mentioned, it's too early to judge, you know. That's a difficult part actually to give comments on this issue.
Thank you, sir. You know, one of the things, everyone, that we have a theme, particularly from Wall Street, that suggests that capital is a coward, and you know, there are some apprehensions and misgivings about doing business in Africa. Ambassador Lewis mentioned engaging our SMEs and certainly our larger corporations. Some might be doing businesses there. But Ms. Waddleton, I'll throw this to you, as your organization is about building these bridges. When we understand that capital is a coward, how do we move beyond those misperceptions and apprehensions that are there in order to get U.S. businesses and other institutions to focus on Africa in a positive light as an environment to do business?
Well, I think that's a really good question. One thing that I have seen over the years is when U.S. business thinks about Africa, there are two things that come up repeatedly. They don't know much about it. There's a lot of ignorance. and they don't know how to get into the African market. They determine that's something they would like to do. They basically don't know how to find partners. And in terms of the ignorance, one thing I like to say is that Africa should rebrand itself, because there's an awful lot of positive going on. But of course, the news doesn't show positive. That's not what sells. And I remember an advertising campaign on television some years ago for Australia. Well, it's really far away. I don't know, I'd like to go there, I've never been, but they had this absolutely spectacular series of ads of how beautiful Australia is and how great it is. And sometimes I think that having been to a lot of African countries and knowing the opportunities that are there, there needs to be a more focused sort of advertising. Let the US know what you have to offer, because you have a lot. And so I think that would help overcome the ignorance gap. I also think that kind of very aggressive campaign of African embassies inside the US, ramping up commercial sections, which can often be very small, having consulates around the country that focus on business, let people see what Africa has going for it. That would be something. And then ramp up.
Is your organization actively engaged in this, Ms. Waddleton? Is your organization actively engaged in this? And could you present maybe an example of how? The best practice model, maybe?
Okay, so we are a startup. Regrettably, we had to take a COVID break, not unlike a lot of people, but we do talk to companies. And we will have a database of American companies. I think in the beginning, these will be people who already know Africa or who know enough about Africa to want to. And women. What's happening?
Hold on one second, Ms. Waddleton. We're getting a little a backwash. Could someone please mute their mic so that we can make sure all of our participants has the opportunity to be heard clearly? Thank you very much.
And then women who've already lived, worked, or studied in the US who know the American market and who will be ideal partners for US. And I think what we will be doing, what we've begun to do, is to bring people together in a database so they can communicate in an effective way. Because I think Africans, I know from my work State Department looking at American markets, say, wow, it's really big and scary. I don't know how to do that. Once again, Americans looking at Africa, big and scary. I don't know how to do that. And so the issue is bridging those gaps. And I happen to think that women, business women, are very good choices for that. I think there's a lot of studies show how well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's actually going to have to be our final. I'm sorry, Aaron, to cut you off. We really appreciate the moderation of this panel.
I just had one final.
Okay, we can maybe get
Lawson,
another.
I just had one final.
2 more minutes, and then we'll have to wrap the panel.
Sure, I just had one final question for Mr. Whitehall, because we kind of touched on the issue, but we didn't kind of get to it. We talked about aid to trade, and Mr. Whitehall, one of the things when we look at an appropriations budget, and certainly over the course of the last 8 years or so, where we have seen the aid to Africa diminish. It has gone down over the course of the last 8 years, our foreign appropriations budget. When we look at the amount of U.S. Monetary aid decreasing going into the continent, some take that for diminished interest and commitment to the continent. So in your organization is focused on aid to trade, but sometimes it's perceived as when there's not as much aid going that the U.S. interest and commitment has diminished on the continent. Can you touch on that in the last few minutes that we have, sir? Mr. Whitehill.
Yeah, I'll make it very simple. I mean, aid to trade is nothing without direct investment towards a compelling vision that's going to allow Africa in its 5 separate regions to stand up and come together in the way that's most meaningful to the continent. And unless the U.S. gets its stuff together to allow that and create the right compelling economic policy and social civic environment for that to happen, China's going to eat our lunch. It's just that simple. And China's going to do that digitally. So the other part of this is Africans beyond aid, Africans beyond trade, because ultimately the warfare plane in all of this is going to be digital. And so we're going to have more of a totalitarian infrastructure that's going to be put in place digitally by China. And we're not competing on the ground in a great way there and now. So if we're not looking at the top end of the funnel, which is more around the military and geostrategic stuff, once again, we can talk trade all we want, but if we don't get back to a compelling vision where all Western democracies can come back around and stand up and come together, trade is an industrial era 20th century concept. What is the 21st century concept? What is the 21st century vision? I gave you one. Africa is a transport, a transnational export network. That's one opportunity. That's one way to say it. That's a bold vision that can rally resources behind it to get it beyond even trade. Will we do that? I don't know. But what I can tell you is there's a reason why KKR, the largest private equity firm in the world, the most successful private equity firm in the world, didn't last more than 3 years on the continent. So we can talk about trade, and we can talk about aid, and we can talk about small business. But if you can't build markets that have equity and where people can exit to stakeholders and shareholders in functional markets and in big private equity firms, ultimately you're still fighting for crumbs, and ultimately that still means you're going to need more aid. So there's systemic funnel issues at every level is my point, my friend. And so talking about one thing but not the other is not the solution. It's saying here from the top end of the funnel, from war all the way down to aid and hundreds of millions of Africans who are living in poverty, where are each of those steps and what do those systemic reinforced feedback loops look like? And where is the pinpointed way that we can create a compelling vision to rally resources strategically? That's the best opportunity. Thank you.
And thank all of
you
you.
For that. And that was the closing segment and closing question. And I'd like to thank all of our panelists for participating in our segment this afternoon. Thank you again, Dr. Ken Giammi in the African Leadership Magazine. And we turn our session back over into the capable hands of Ms. Lwandi Lawson. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you, Aaron. It was really wonderful. We had our moderator for this, this panel, Aaron Manigo. He's the president of Global Policy Leaders and a policy leader himself from New York. We want to also thank our panelists, Dr. Fanjoy, Mrs. Poku, Mrs. Waddleton, Minister Gebreyesu, Mr. Whitehall, Mr. Ebong, and of course, Mrs. Lewis. We were also joined during this session and very honored to be joined by Dr. Adesola Adedutan. He's the CEO of First Bank of Nigeria, and we are delighted that he's with us as well. I'm hoping that you won't step away now, though, because we will close with an interview with a little more depth with Ambassador Rita Jo Lewis, getting more of her perspectives. But before we go to that segment, we have some very special awards that we want to present today, and Dr. Giammi will guide us through that process.
Thank you so much, Wandi, and thank you, Aaron. That was wonderful. I wish we had all the time to continue the conversation. But again, it's Africa, and this is Africa's time. We will continue this conversation. And thank God COVID is easing. We hope to do it in Washington, D.C. very, very soon, and on the margins of the UNGA. Very quickly, we've come to a session, very brief one, but one of the high points of our gatherings. It takes tremendous sacrifice, tremendous commitment for things to work in Africa. And there are men and women who continue to make those things happen. Like the Singaporean, Lee Kuan Yew, he said that for success, for results to happen in third world countries, it doesn't just happen. It takes tremendous selfless sacrifices and commitment from a few individuals. And today we have a few individuals who want to celebrate an honor with the African Leadership Awards. We've got the African Banking Leadership Awards, and then we've got the African Inspirational Leadership Awards. A few of them, first of my list is a big brother, someone I respect tremendously, the CEO and Group Managing Director of the First Bank of Nigeria, Dr. Adesola Kazeem Adedutan. He's going to be receiving the African Bank of the Year from the African Leadership Magazine for what we consider commitment, focus, innovative banking products. We had the discussions when Mr. Ini Ebong shared earlier. I want to really celebrate and commend First Bank of Nigeria for the work you do, not just in Nigeria, but on the West African coast. Congratulations on receiving the Africa Bank of the Year and for your innovative product offerings. Congratulations. Can you do us the honors of lifting your award trophy? And please kindly put your hands together to celebrate him. Don't be jealous. Thank you. Please put your hands together. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We truly appreciate this. It's an honor, and rest assured that we treasure this. We truly just treasure this.
Before I move on to the next, there's a short video from First Bank. Maybe you need to watch it very briefly, and then we'll move on to the next award recipient. Technica, can you help us with the short video from the First Bank Group?
Are they going to show our short video now?
This isn't the first time we've had to show love to complete strangers. It isn't the first time we've had to help people in need. It isn't the first time we've worn uniforms, or the first time we've missed dinner parties or football games. It isn't the first time we've prayed for a miracle, but it may be the first time the world as we know it would change forever. At First Bank, with 126 years of consistent innovative banking under our belt, we have certainly seen a lot of firsts. That's why we've been at the forefront of the support of the COVID relief effort in Nigeria. And now, as we all try to get back to normal and see our loved ones again for the first time in a long time, and go back to the places we love and do the things we cherish, let's remember to put safety first, because we still have a lot more firsts in us, and we know you do too.
Congratulations again to First Bank, and congratulations to Dr. Adesola Adedutan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Next on my list is Mrs. Nana Amapoku. Mrs. Nana Amapoku is the Deputy CEO of the Ghana Exim Bank, Ghana Export-Import Bank, and she's receiving an African Business Leadership Excellence Award. Please, can we put our hands together for Mrs. Nana Amapoku? Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. I also know there is a short video from Ms. Nana Amapoku. Is that ready, Technica? While we run, we've got just 3 months to go, and then we'll be done. Technica, do we have a video from Ms. Nana? Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Greetings from Accra, Ghana. I'm currently on leave, my annual vacation, and I couldn't be happier. This is the best leave package so far. The African Business Leadership Award and a commendation from the US state of Georgia. This month of June has been a very exciting one for me. On the 4th of June, I was conferred with the Outstanding Woman in Finance Award. I must say I'm very humbled, I'm very grateful, and I feel very acknowledged. And it's a very good feeling when your hard work is noticed. Next February, 1st of February 2022, I will be 20 years in the industry I love, in the sector I love, banking. On this occasion, I would like to acknowledge 5 strong men who have groomed me along this journey. Their names are in the African Leadership magazine coming up anytime, any moment from now. Dr. Sisraku Mensah, Dr. Richmond Etuahine, Mr. Daniel Lado, Mr. Gabriel Edgar, and Mr. Jude Arthur. These are my former bosses who've played pivotal roles.
They have their own video clip. Are you sure they will not show?
Thank them very much for all their support.
I didn't tell you.
A very big thank you to Dr. Kepiami and his team, Kembet. Everybody else on the team has been amazing. Thank you very much.
It's
unfortunate due to the COVID, and this ceremony couldn't actually hold at a fixed venue where all of us could be present. But I'm sure in the not too distant future that could happen. Thank you very much once again. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. These are the 2 videos we have. We promised to show everybody else's video. And we just this morning have been informed by legislators from the state of Georgia that next month, a team of 10 lawmakers will be visiting Nigeria, Ghana, and the Gambia to our days for this event. And they'll be presenting special awards. I'm sure Ethiopia will be able to invite us. We'll be paying visits. But I'm not sure of 3 countries, Nigeria, Ghana, and the Gambia, to present special commendation awards to these deserving honorees for today. We'll take your videos after now, subsequently. But for the next set of awards, very quickly, let me recognize Professor Mohammed Bello. Professor Mohammed Bello is Managing Director, Galaxy Backbone. Professor Bello, can you, let's see your words and have a hand. Yeah, put your hands together for Professor Bello, the CEO of Galaxy Backbone Telecoms. Congratulations. Congratulations. And may I now call on Professor...
Thank you. Yeah, can I say 1 or 2 things?
Okay, yes, please.
Dr. Ken Jami, actually, and also other very important people under this ALM group. I have to say that I appreciate you very much for giving this particular award to us. We are honored. And then we have to tell you that actually is more or less a motivational kind of an award you have given us. We'll do all what we could to see that we have continued to uplift the organizations where we are to become much more relevant in Nigeria and also other organizations in Africa to somehow go along with the objectives of the awards as you have somehow enshrined. So thank you very much for the award. We appreciate that.
Thank you so much, Professor Mohammed. Can we put our hands together for him? Thank you. Thank you very much. I am in London at the moment, but I look forward to the trip next month because I don't have a choice but to join the delegation coming from the US to pay visits. The next person on the list is someone I consider very dear to me. Of course, everyone is there, but he is especially very dear. Professor John Kennedy Opara. He's a big brother. And the last time he was honored was in the US when the Maryland then Governor Martin O'Malley personally attended at the event at St. Regis, Washington, D.C., and honored him. And we're excited that again we have you here today. Please put your hands together for Professor John Kennedy Opara as he leaves this award. Put your hands together for him. Congratulations for what you do. Yeah. He is receiving the Special African Entrepreneur Excellence Award. We'll hear a few remarks from him. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ken. Nice to see you again. I feel so excited coming on this platform once more. For me, success has no finishing line. We have to do the best possible to leave the world better than we made the world. What defines us is the value we add. What makes us is what we bring to the society we belong to. And I know that this award will inspire me to do much more than we're doing now. If you don't inspire people, you will expire. You will exit without recognition. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Myself and my team will do whatever it takes to keep adding value to the system, to keep making a difference. And God willing, we will not let you down. We will not let the world down. We really appreciate you. God bless you. And I say to God be the glory.
Thank you so much. Congratulations again on the good work you do.
Yeah.
Congratulations. Please, it's the call to do more. We expect to hear more wins. And then the last but not the least, another very dear brother, Mr. Peter Ko-Chiori, is the Managing Director, CEO of Ocean Glory Commodities Limited. And he's been honored today and is also part of those that have been selected for the special congressional commendation with the legislators' visit. Please, can we put our hands together for Mr. Peter Ko-Chiori? I don't know if I'm not seeing him anymore. I think he was here just a few minutes ago. I'm sure he will come right back on. So on that note, whenever he comes on, we'll give him the opportunity to showcase his award. On that note, we want to thank every one of you for the work you do. And your work is not just being heard within your community, but it's global, it's going everywhere. And we're proud to be one of those to tell the story. Thank you, Honorable Minister, for the work you do in Ethiopia. Your Prime Minister won our Persons of the Year a couple of years ago, and we are proud of the effort. Yeah, we are not unawares of the challenges, but we see a commitment to drive progress in that very important country in Africa. Thank you so much, Honorable Minister. I think Mr. Peter Cole is here. Put your hands together for Peter Cole as he showcases his award. And then congratulations, Mr. Peter Cole.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Good evening, gentlemen. I want to really say a big thank you to ALM for this award. I sincerely appreciate this for really giving us a pat on our back to, inspire us more to do more what we're doing in Africa, and ensuring that we keep, pushing and ensuring that we add value to our system here in Africa. I really commend you guys for the work you're doing. Thank you so much. I appreciate this award. God bless you all.
Thank you so much, Peter. And on that note, I'll hand over to Wendy for the discussion with Ambassador Rita Joe. And then the last thing we'll be having would be the editorial showcase of our magazine with all the winners in. I'm sure you're looking forward to that. Over to you, Wendy. Thank you.
Yes, we are.
Thank you. And congratulations to all of the awardees. We just wanted to have one final piece to this discussion. We've been, of course, discussing U.S.-Africa business and what policy will actually shape that business as we move through COVID and look at these partnerships, recovery, and sustainability. So we're delighted that the last of our interviews today will be with Ambassador Rita Joe Lewis. She's a senior fellow and Director of Congressional Affairs for the German Marshall Fund of the United States. She's got a lot of experience previously with the US State Department, of course, and can really help us to dig in a little more deeply on some of the nuts and bolts. So welcome once again. Thank you for your contributions to the panel. And I wanted to start by just asking you something that many of our attendees have even been typing in the chats on Facebook as well as here as well. And that has to do with, beyond this this usual pattern of Africa serving as a source of raw materials, if you will, for the West. What do you see, what has your experience brought you as far as any new frontiers in terms of Africa-US relations, things that maybe we're not hearing on the nightly news, but maybe give us a pattern for what this growth might look like in the future?
You actually blinked out there a little bit, but I think based on the conversation that we had, and I think you were saying, how does an organization like the one that I sit in have a focus on Africa? I would tell you, first of all, definitely want to just send my congratulations to the awardees. It's just so amazing to see all the individuals on this call and to see what the Africa Magazine, Leaders Magazine is doing to highlight the work that everyone has been showcasing and have just been so passionate about the issues that we are all here discussing. You know, I was very fortunate that when I was the Special Representative for Global Intergovernmental Affairs in the Obama administration in the State Department, we had an opportunity to focus on state and local leaders. That was really what my charge was. And it was very new to the State Department. So when I hear you talk about the fact that Georgia state legislators are going to be visiting those countries, as well as the Governor O'Malley, who has also, former Governor O'Malley, who was instrumental when he was governor and during the time that I was there, has people on this call who are being awarded for the work that they did within his administration. What it does, it confirms to me that we're all in the right space, and that this is a space that is going to be growing more and more, and hopefully within this administration, that from President Biden's perspective, you can see some unique differences. I think being at the German Marshall Fund, an organization which is primarily focused on U.S. transatlantic relations, one of the things that people really don't understand about our organization, and I'm actually speaking in my own personal capacity, but I'm talking about GMF, is that, you know, U.S.-Europe cannot exist in itself alone. It is now, we're seeing that years ago when GMF started in U.S.-Europe, China, U.S.-Europe, Asia, there was very little interest, but we have fast forward in here into 2021, and it is now becoming the thing. I think this is what is happening on the U.S. Europe, Africa. You know, in 2012, 4 years before I joined GMF, they had begun a program, a annual signature convening with the Policy Center for the New South in Morocco. And so for the last 5 years of being at GMF, I've had the opportunity to participate in this annual convening of very, very signature individuals who are thought leaders in business and government, who are looking at the US, Europe, and the wider Atlantic and all of the countries that border on that. And of course, what is that? What is the prime focus there? And it's all about the relationship with Africa. And so all of the big issues are discussed there. They're discussing the security issues, you're discussing global health issues, you're discussing the issues around trade and investment. And I have seen an evolving of how, even since GMF is no longer the prime organizer, it is now within the Policy Center for the New South and the work that they're doing, that Africa is the prominent the discussion point of all of the conversations that take place. But the thing of what I see in my current position is that how working with Congress is working with the US Congress and our US House of Representatives and our US Senate, I see lawmakers who have been key strategic partners in the work of Africa from a US perspective. And I think that they want to continue to do that within this new administration and able to do it in a bipartisan way. I mean, you know, as they say in Washington, we don't agree on a lot of things, but one of the things that we are seeing, it may be how you treat it differently, but you're seeing that in our House of Representatives with a new chairman, Congressman Greg Meeks, with a subcommittee chair of Congresswoman Karen Bass, all on House Foreign Affairs. You see over in the Senate side, in US Senate with our Senate Foreign Relations Committee, of individuals who have been not just talking about, as Karen Bass has said, we got to move from trade to aid, but we also are looking at the big issues around humanitarian concerns, the security concerns, but now, of course, the global health concerns. And so when I see an organization like GMF be engaged in working with the Policy Center for New South and understanding that we have continued throughout this season to have convenings around US, Africa, Europe, because I think all of the issues that we're all facing in Europe, in US, and in Africa, issues around global health, issues around the vaccine supply, issues around COVID-19 as we come out of this, issues around climate change are going to be at the forefront. And US and Europe has got to be an active participant. And I believe that we are, and I only see this work growing more and more within organizations like ours.
That's very helpful. You know, some of our earlier panelists were pointing to the idea that, of course, there's such large investment now from India, from China. And since you were mentioning the global scope of the work that you're doing, do you see any barriers to maybe larger interaction in terms of the US, Africa alliances and actual investment?
Well, I think the barriers is the ones that traditionally have been discussed in your previous panel. It's about, I believe, it looks like there needs to be this new narrative that we all need to be coming up with about how we engage in Africa and how we talk about engaging with Africa, and incumbent upon all of us to dispel those misnomers about Africa and to make sure that we understand that it is about, you know, when I participated in the Atlantic Dialogue over these last 5 years, it's about Africa setting the standards for what Africa wants it to be, because they are the prime controller of their own destiny. But countries like America, are we going to be a partner in that? Are we going to be to help drive all of the work that needs to be done? And I think that what I've seen in this new leadership, in this new administration, is that it is one that is going to be born out of trust. It's going to be one that's going to be born out of respect, and it's going to be one that's going to be born out of friendship. And that friendship, I think, is key, because when you see a new president, and I've worked for a number of presidents throughout my career, but when you see a new president in his first iteration of outreach to leaders, put African leaders in his call book and reach out to them, not only from a bilateral perspective, but also from a multilateral perspective, when he reached out to the chair of the AU and accorded him the respect to say that not only is America going to be working in a bilateral way, but to strengthen and deepen relationships in Africa, we're going to also be working with them not in a multilateral way, but also with other multilateral institutions that are doing the work that we so desperately needed throughout the continent.
Well, you know, there's a lot of your experience that we'd love to draw on in the last few minutes that we do have together. But you, of course, this idea of moving from aid to trade, you have a lot of experience, I know, especially working with female entrepreneurs in South America and other parts of the world. So I was wondering if you could share some of the examples that you have seen in which there was an empowerment of a non-Western population to establish collaboration with the US over just a relationship of dependence.
You know, what I can definitely attest to is when I traveled very extensively throughout countries around the world, what is very important for all of them is that how are we going to be leveraging all of the partnerships and relationships? We cannot expect government to be the answer and to be all, to end all, when we're talking about engaging from a private sector or an entrepreneurial perspective. And that's why I am always excited when I work with state and local leaders. And I worked with state and local leaders in Africa, in South Africa. I work with governors in Nigeria on a whole host of issues, everything running from rule of law issues to trade and investment issues. But one of the things that is critical is that you have to have, I believe, a strong community of folks in those particular countries that want to do business with each other. And that's why the conversations around the Africa diaspora, I think, is always so important, because people who want to engage and want to do business with each other and want to work on other issues around, whether it's democracy and rule of law issues, and you name it. And so what I have seen is individuals who come together with women entrepreneurship programs that have been very successful throughout countries that normally would not have seats at the table, people who would not have seats at the table. I think we saw the initiative that President Obama started with youth leaders and entrepreneurs across Africa. We've seen that the Congress is willing to continue to be supportive of that from a financial perspective. We've seen the president welcome that engagement and has said he wants to continue that program. I think that we have to understand that all of this is going to be a force multiplier for and with it, and again with each other. There's not going to be one thing that is going to be the determining factor, and we can't think of that the private sector is going to be the one leading the way. We know that the private sector, I worked at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the biggest business federation in the world, and they do now have a U.S. Africa Center. And it is so important to see that now at the chamber. It's important to see that other organizations are marrying with the Corp Council in Africa, and the people who have been the stalwarts about doing business and working in Africa now have many more partners to choose from. But I think it's going to be the Africa diaspora community that is going to be the most surprising, that we hopefully can put some faith in, but not just faith, we can actually put resources and technical advice and technical assistance within them if they want to do work on the continent.
Certainly a very hopeful picture that you're painting. And I would love to just close with, some of your own personal experience. If you were to be able to speak to those who are developing their qualities, capabilities, and preparing themselves on the African continent to take advantage of this time period, whether they're civic leaders, whether they're educational leaders, whether they're in healthcare or any of the industries, what are some of the ways that you might advise them? What should they be developing right now in order to participate fully in the future that you've been describing?
Well, I can actually say from the U.S. perspective that we need to really look at the fact that I believe this is going to be an administration that is going to be producing a whole of government approach as it works within Africa. And from that whole of government approach, looking at all of the economic engines and all of the economic drivers of the particular agencies in our U.S. government, along with the organizations and entities from the private sector, to say we need to be working together in order to drive this, because this work is going to be hard. This work is going to be complicated. And when I see whether it is Department of Commerce or our Export-Import Bank or our new OPIC, which is the DFC, or I see the Africa Development Bank and others, and our Ag Department and others, I believe that it's going to take all of that, working with our U.S. Embassies and our consulates, and working with our commercial officers who can help in country as well as here in the United States, help our businesses be prepared and ready to do business. To say that, as we say, America is back, I think what we have to say is America is open, and we have to say that our state and local leaders are much open. I put a whole trust in them because they are the economic drivers in their communities, the governors, the mayors, and a lot of that happens in the same in countries around the world. The most important thing that all of them talk about is it's not about, they don't talk about it in a trade investment perspective. They really talking about competitiveness. They talk about creation of jobs. They talk about the fact that they want to make their community of which they live in much more, they want to make sure that the community that they're serving is prepared and ready if they want to do business. And I think that all business leaders and all country participants just want to have an open process. They want to have a transparent process. They want to have a process that's accountable. They want to have a process that they feel like everybody is on an even playing field, or at least a level playing field. And that doesn't matter whether you're in the United States or whether you're in Africa or whether you're in China or Brazil or wherever. all of these leaders, no matter what level you are of doing business, whether you're small, medium, or large, are saying the exact same thing. And I think that's where the promise is. And I think that's where the hope is. And I think women is going to play an outsized role. I think that young people are going to also play an outsized role because that's where the future is. And when you look at the population and the growth in Africa, and you look at the consumer, that the consumers that everybody wants to market to, that's where the hope is. And so to be able to do business, we're going to have to all come to the table and make sure that everyone has an equal playing field seat at that table.
Well, I certainly appreciate that, and that's going to have to be our last word. It's a good one for us to close on. I want to thank you very much. This is Rita Jo Lewis. She is, of course, the Senior Fellow and Director of Congressional Affairs for the German Marshall Fund of the United States. Thanking her and, of course, all of the panelists who have been a part of this, our presenters and our keynote speakers. We have really been able to advance, I think, this discussion on U.S.-Africa relations, partnerships, recovery, and, of course, sustainability. Whatever is started, it needs to be able to continue into the future. And so in closing, and thanking those of you who have joined us from all over the world, at least 40 nations, I think we've seen represented in our online streams. We want to thank you for being a part of this discussion. And I can't go without noticing you're putting some very practical questions to one another, and you're networking in the chats and in things that you're saying to each other. You're asking questions about access to capital, permits, distribution channels, manufacturing know-how. And so this, of course, is always just part of an ongoing conversation. Hopefully you've been able to exchange some contact information and to get to know some of the partners or collaborators that you'll work with in the future. So I'm Nwandi Lawson. Thank you once again for joining African Leadership Magazine for one of these wonderful forums. We're going to close today with a look at the upcoming magazine. I want to ask if our technical staff will cue up the video for us and let us get just a premier glance into what's coming up next. Thank you all so much for joining us today.
Come and join me around the world, mind and body like a bird. We flying high, we flying high. You can fall, but you can rise and soar. Sawaleke azinga galege, sawaleke, sawaleke azinga galege, sawaleke, sawaleke azinga galege, sawaleke, sawaleke azinga galege, sawaleke. One love and one world. We have to live together. Another day under the moonlight. I have found a new world. We have to live together. We have to live together. Life is so beautiful. Life is so beautiful. Full setback, confusion and struggle, lost in the dark. You might listen to me. We flying high, we flying high. You can fall, but you can rise and soar. Sawaleke azinga galege, sawaleke, sawaleke azinga galege, sawaleke. One love and one world. We have to live together. Another day under the moonlight. I have found a new world. We have to live together. We have to live together. Life is so beautiful. One love, one life, and one world. We have to live together. One heart, one mind. We need to learn. We have to live. We have to live together. We have to live. We have to live together. We have to live. One love and one world. We have to live together. Another day under the moonlight. I have found a new world. We have to live together. We have to live together. Life is so beautiful. Come and join me around the world, mind and body like a bird. We flying high.
Well, we are really appreciative of receiving that that little preview of the upcoming edition. And as we close, we want to turn it over to the group managing editor for African Leadership Magazine. I think he is here with us. Yes, Kingsley, if you'll please take us out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. I mean, the simple message from this entire engagement is that is Africa o'clock, is Africa's time, and the conversation, has just begun again, and I'm hopeful that, like you rightly mentioned earlier, the conversation won't end here. I like that, some of those who participated are already taking the conversation beyond this platform, exchanging emails and also exchanging messages and trying to see how they can have meetings. That's actually the hallmark of the African Leadership events, that beyond the four walls of the gathering that we normally have and beyond the conversations that we have, that people also eventually begin to take these discussions beyond those platforms. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you on behalf of the African Leadership Group. I'd like to specifically thank the speakers, everyone who has spoken today. You've made this event a memorable one. I'd like to congratulate the awardees. I'll congratulate, of course, the CEO of First Bank Group, under whose dynamic leadership the bank has been growing in leaps and bounds. I would like to congratulate Ms. Nana, of course, and for her support at the Ghana Exim Bank. I'd like to also congratulate Mr. Churi, and a gentleman that has actually been pushing through. If you understand how difficult it is to do business in this part of the world, you understand why we celebrate people like this that are already excelling. I would like to also congratulate Professor Kennedy, an amazing gentleman who has transitioned from public service into the entrepreneurship, and is doing amazing work in that regard with the CSS group. I'd like to also congratulate, of course, Mr. Honorable, His Excellency Mr. Teka, for that wonderful. We've been friends with Ethiopia, and we've also always been supporting the government to ensure that they unlock the amazing potentials that the country has, and we commend them for what they are doing with his ministry, and of course everyone who has participated, everyone who has brought us a message today. You are the reason why this entire event was a huge success. And I wouldn't go without also thanking my colleagues who are working behind the scene to make sure that this event was a huge success. Of course, I'd like to thank Ehiz Ayere. Of course, he's in charge of the events, ensuring that every one of you who participated got your information and everything you needed on time. I'd like to thank also Ms. Boma. Some of you who had interfaced with her, of course, would have gotten an email from time to time. Mayowa, Kene, Kembet, of course, who was responsible for ensuring that the clips you just watched of the magazine was ready to ensure that at least everyone saw it. And of course, who else? There are amazing young men and women who have also committed themselves to promoting Africa. And of course, to the chairman, the CEO of the African Leadership Group, a passionate African, a tireless African who has, he sleeps Africa, dreams Africa, and breathes Africa. Is the reason why this conversation in the past 13 years have continued, even when they told us that it wasn't possible. He dared to believe that we could change the narrative. We could also encourage people to see Africa from a different light. And that's why this conversation is not stopping. And of course, for everyone who had joined us from over 42 countries, and of course, who had kept the chat rooms buzzing, I thank you so much for joining us. I would say don't let this conversation not end here. We have our social media platform that is very, very engaging, always providing updates on what is happening in the continent. On Twitter, they are at Africa LM. We also have, of course, our Facebook page, very active at African Leadership Magazine. We also have our website, African Leadership Magazine .co.uk. All these are platforms and channels through which you can reach and connect with us. and let's make this continent, let's take the continent to the promised land. The journey has just begun, and it is until we tell our own story. The story, of course, will continue to be defined by the news, the trite headline that the media tends to to say about Africa. But let's begin to tell our own story. Let's tell the world that there is so much happening in the continent, and like they will always say, it's Africa's time, and Africa is open for business. I think it was our former chairman who had had said that Africa is the moving train. If you get to the train station, you join the train. If you do not join the train leaves you behind. So the continent is moving. It's in the best interest of everyone to hop on the train and move with us to the promised land. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, our audience, we've come to the end of today's program. We have, of course, keep updated with our forthcoming events. You're welcome to join us for our future events. And of course, until 2021, we would also be having the 7th edition of the US Africa Business and Forum and Business and Policy Forum. Keep a date with us, and let's continue to change the narrative about the continent and define how others see us. Thank you very much. Yeah,
and let me quickly add, I'm sure he doesn't deliberate, Mr. Aaron Manaigo, the president of Global Politics.
Yes.
Fantastic moderation. Let me help him. And then put your hands together for my brother Aaron Manaigo. And then for our ever dependable Wande Lawson. Thank you. That was amazing as always. And I look forward to expanding these discussions, this collaboration with all of you, wonderful speakers, Ambassador Rita Joe, everybody else. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you. Over to you, Wande, as we wrap.
Thank you. Yeah. All right.
I have nothing more to add. So, you shouldn't prolong even a very good thing. So I think we'll say have a wonderful rest of the day, and we'll look forward to seeing you at the next forum. Bye-bye.
Thank you.